A crippled young lord stands in a freezing blizzard, holding a sword for the first time in 10 years as a pack of deadly monsters surrounds him. But as the beasts leap, a massive shockwave of blue mana explodes from his blade, vaporizing the entire forest. Nobody in his peaceful hometown knows that this limping merchant's son is actually a legendary, blood-soaked war demon. To understand how this monster ended up hiding his identity to protect the wife he abandoned, we must go back to where it all began. In the western lands lies Mahidor, a continent completely overshadowed by the Eshrashar Empire. 4 years have passed since Emperor Cartion violently claimed the throne. His reign brought nothing but endless expansion and bloody conquests, leaving the entire region in absolute chaos. One by one, any neighboring kingdom that dared oppose the emperor was forcefully subjugated and brought to its knees. In the chaotic aftermath of those brutal wars, a legendary mercenary managed to bury his violent past and vanish completely. But for our main character Elric, a completely different kind of battle is about to begin. While trying to live a quiet life, his peaceful days are shattered by a sudden demand from his father. His father bluntly tells him to get married, out of nowhere. Just like that, Elric cannot even process what he just heard, his brain completely shutting down. He seriously hopes he misheard that. His father calmly explains that his bride will be none other than the young lady of Baron Wibben household. Elric is left stuttering and totally lost as to why this is happening. To make things even more overwhelming, his father starts listing her traits, describing her as a remarkably beautiful 16-year-old girl who enjoys quiet gardening. And apparently that makes her the perfect candidate for a quiet, trouble-free marriage. And just like that, at the young age of 14, Elric has his fate sealed without him having a single say in the matter. He is expected to marry a noble lady whose face he has never even seen before. The sheer absurdity of the situation weighs heavily on his mind. The realization that he is actually getting married hits him like a truck, and he is left standing there feeling completely powerless. Before he knows it, the big day arrives. Elric is dressed in a white suit standing in a grand cathedral, still unable to comprehend his father's bizarre decision. As the bride slowly walks down the aisle, his anxiety reaches an all-time high. He wonders why a high and mighty noble family would ever agree to marry a commoner from a simple merchant family. His hands are shaking so much he has to clutch his trousers just to keep them steady. He fully prepares himself for a cold and arrogant noblewoman. But when he finally looks up, his breath catches in his throat. Standing right in front of him is his new bride, Tyria. She introduces herself softly as Tyria Wibben, looking like an absolute goddess under the chapel lights. Her golden hair shimmers like warm wheat fields, instantly commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Her eyes are a soft green, reminding him of fresh spring sprouts pushing through the snow. Her pale skin contrasts beautifully with her vivid red lips, making her look almost unreal. If he had to describe her in just a single word, it would easily be elegant. He never expected his arranged bride to be this stunning. Everything about her screams high class. She radiates a mysterious aura that leaves Elric completely spellbound. As Elric stands there frozen, his father gives him a firm nudge, reminding him to actually greet his new wife instead of just staring like an idiot. Fumbling over his words, Elric bows nervously and stutters out a greeting, telling her it is an absolute honor to meet her. The entire ceremony feels like a chaotic blur, but through all the noise, one clear realization starts to settle in his heart. They are officially husband and wife now, meaning he is going to spend the rest of his life standing right by her side. As they stand together before the altar, the weight of his vows finally hits him, turning his initial fear into something entirely different. Looking back on that moment years later, Elric realizes one crucial truth. Tyria was his very first love. He remembers trying so hard to hide his foolish grin during the ring exchange, feeling incredibly embarrassed by how happy he was. His attempt to look cool failed miserably, resulting in a tense expression as he tried to hold back his joy. But back then, Elric was so caught up in his own excitement that he missed a critical detail. He had no idea what was actually going on behind her quiet gaze. He was completely blind to her true feelings, never once realizing how much his clueless happiness might have been hurting her. Later that night, a heavy storm rages outside the grand mansion, mirroring the dark truth that is about to be revealed. Inside, a single candle flickers as Elric sits alone, reflecting on the whirlwind of events that brought him here. He gazes down at the silver ring on his finger, still struggling to believe that he is actually a married man now. He smiles warmly, thinking about how someone so dignified and elegant is now his wife. It almost feels too good to be true. But then his father's words echo in his mind once again. She is the young lady of the Baron Wibben household. Suddenly his smile fades. No matter how much he thinks about it, something about this entire arrangement feels incredibly off. Why would a proud, noble family marry their daughter off to a simple merchant's son? There has to be a catch. Unable to shake the unsettling feeling, Elric decides to ask Rhonda, his family's loyal headmaid, hoping to get some real answers. Rhonda instantly hesitates, her gaze shifting away nervously as she struggles to find the right words to say. Seeing her reaction only makes Elric more desperate. He begs her to tell him the truth since she knows everything about the family affairs. Rhonda lets out a heavy sigh, closing her eyes as she realizes she can no longer keep the dark secret from him. With a solemn voice, she reveals the devastating truth. This was nothing more than a cold political marriage. She explains that while the Wibben barony once enjoyed immense wealth, they are now drowning in a massive mountain of debt with no way out. Elric's family saw this as the perfect opportunity, offering to pay off all of the barony debts in exchange for their daughter's hand in marriage. In doing so, his family of wealthy merchants would finally gain the noble status they had always desperately craved. The horrifying reality hits Elric like a ton of bricks. He asks with a trembling voice if Tyria was essentially sold to them like a piece of property. Rhonda stays silent. That silence is all the confirmation he needs, and Elric feels his world completely shatter. He grips his head in sheer panic and guilt, realizing he has played a part in ruining an innocent girl's life. Rhonda calls out to him in concern as Elric suddenly bolts from the room, unable to stay still for another second. He sprints down the hallways of the mansion, his heart pounding in his chest as he desperately searches for her. All he can think about is finding Tyria, wanting nothing more than to apologize and explain that he had no idea about any of this. He runs faster, praying that he can somehow make things right and ease the immense burden she is carrying. Breathing heavily, he finally reaches the door to her bedchamber, his hand trembling as he presses it against the wood. He pauses, trying to catch his breath and gather his thoughts before knocking. But just as he is about to speak, he hears a faint and heart-wrenching sound coming from inside the room. He freezes in place, realizing the sound is the muffled crying of his new bride. With wide eyes, he gently leans in, his heart aching as the quiet sobs become clearer. Elric cautiously peeks through a tiny crack in the door, holding his breath so he doesn't startle her. Through the gap, he sees Tyria huddled in the dark, tears streaming down her pale cheeks in absolute despair. She sits alone on the cold floor, hugging her knees tightly as she weeps for the life and family she was forced to leave behind. Seeing his beautiful bride in such immense pain completely breaks Elric, filling him with a deep sense of self-loathing. In that exact moment, Elric realizes that his mere presence in this house is a constant reminder of her tragic fate. He knows he cannot let this injustice continue. He makes a firm resolve right then and there to have this forced marriage annulled. He immediately rushes to write a formal request, pouring all of his determination into the letter to free Tyria from this contract. With the letter in hand, he marches straight to his father's private office, ready to face the man's wrath. Elric slams the doors open with a loud bang, shouting for his father as he steps inside. He demands that they call off the marriage immediately, standing tall despite his father's intimidating presence. He calls out his father for his cruelty, pointing out that Tyria was essentially sold to them just so their family could buy a noble title. Elric yells with everything he has, refusing to back down from the cold man sitting behind the desk. His father slowly looks up, his voice cutting through Elric's anger like an icy blade as he simply says his name. The sheer authority in his father's voice instantly makes Elric hesitate, his angry momentum grinding to a halt. His father coldly tells him to stop acting like a spoiled child, showing zero remorse for what he has done. He firmly reminds Elric that they are nobility now, and that he needs to start behaving like one instead of crying over moral issues. Looking into his father's merciless eyes, Elric is forced to face the harsh reality of his situation once again. He clenches his fist in absolute frustration, realizing that trying to reason with this cold-hearted man is completely useless. To his father, Elric was never truly a son, but rather a tragedy, a child born by devouring his own mother during childbirth. In his father's eyes, Elric was nothing more than a convenient puppet to be used and discarded to elevate the family status. His father's cold dismissal makes it painfully clear that there is only one way to resolve this. If Elric truly wants to save Tyria and ruin his father's twisted plans, he only has one option left. He has to disappear. He decides to abandon everything, stepping away from the wealth and comfort of his family for the sake of the girl who was sold. With a heavy heart but a clear mind, he begins to walk away, fully prepared to cast aside his name and his future. By vanishing completely, he will destroy the political marriage alliance, effectively throwing a wrench into his father's ambitious plans. He packs up his few belongings, officially abandoning the proud name of Portmer to become a nameless wanderer. Elric steps out into the pouring rain, leaving his old life behind as he heads out into the dark, unforgiving world. But even as he walks away, the memory of Tyria crying continues to haunt him. He cannot help but wonder if she was crying because she missed her family, or if she simply could not stand the sight of a merchant's son. Shaking his head, Elric tries to push those thoughts aside, telling himself that none of it matters anymore since he is leaving anyway. But the painful questions linger in his mind as he walks further and further away from the estate in the heavy downpour. He eventually arrives at a rugged stone outpost where tough warriors gather, ready to forge a new path for himself. A scarred mercenary leader looks down at the young boy in disbelief, asking if he is actually serious about joining their ranks. Without a single hint of hesitation, Elric looks the massive man dead in the eye and confirms his decision. He looks completely determined, declaring his new name to the mercenary, Kashar. With a heavy sword gripped tightly in his hand, the boy who once knew nothing but wealth prepares to step onto the battlefield. For years, he wanders from one brutal war zone to the next, slowly hardening his heart and searching for a place where he can finally belong. He eventually earns a terrifying reputation, feared by all as the legendary sword demon, Kashar. No one would ever suspect that beneath this blood-soaked warrior lies the gentle soul of Elric. The story resumes with Elric, now under the name Kashar, standing alone on the battlefield as a mercenary. Clad in heavy armor beneath a blazing orange sunset, he holds a massive notched sword. He stands completely silent, the weight of countless battles reflecting in his tired eyes as the sky burns above. Despite his youthful looks, there is a coldness in his expression that only a seasoned killer would possess. Suddenly, a massive battalion of armored Imperial soldiers begins to assemble before him with weapons at the ready. Row after row of shields and spears lock into place as they prepare to crush the lone warrior standing in their path. Against an entire army, Elric doesn't even flinch. He stands his ground, completely unfazed by the overwhelming numbers. He slowly raises his massive blade with one hand, the cold steel reflecting the crimson sunset as he prepares to strike. With a heavy breath, he charges forward alone, ready to unleash the devastating power that earned him his legendary title. He swings his sword in a wide, sweeping arc, cutting down several soldiers in a single fluid strike. When the dust finally settles, the battlefield is silent. Elric stands victorious, his face splattered with blood as he gazes coldly at the carnage he left behind. Cut to a cozy and lively tavern filled with patrons chatting over drinks. The gentle clatter of glasses and laughter fills the air. The tavern owner looks up with a pleasant smile as the front bell rings, warmly welcoming the next guest. But as the door opens, the owner's polite smile slightly falters when he spots the newcomer leaning on a cane. It's Elric. He walks in wearing civilian clothes, his head lowered as he relies heavily on his wooden cane. Every step he takes is slow and labored, a clear sign of the heavy toll his years as a mercenary took on his body. The tavern suddenly goes completely silent as patrons recognize him. Whispers ripple through the crowd confirming it's the sword demon. They look at him in disbelief, unable to comprehend why such a legendary and terrifying warrior is walking with a limp. The tavern owner speaks up, asking Elric if something happened, and expressing concern over his severely injured leg. Elric sits down at the bar and casually explains that getting hurt is just a normal occurrence on the battlefield. The owner hands him a newspaper, asking if his injury is serious. Elric sighs, admitting that he will probably be sidelined and out of commission for quite a while. But as Elric casually glances down at the front page, his eyes suddenly widen, and he tightly crunches the paper in shock. The tavern owner notices his sudden shift in behavior and looks at him with concern, asking if something is wrong. Elric's expression turns deadly serious, his eyes locked onto a small printed announcement at the bottom corner of the page. Right there on the paper is a portrait of a very familiar face, a man he never wanted to see again. Outside, a steam train blasts its whistle, ready to depart as the wheels grind against the tracks. The train speeds across the countryside under a beautiful sunset, carrying Elric back to the place he fled years ago. Inside the train compartment, Elric sits quietly, gazing out the window at the passing scenery. His mind wanders back to the newspaper article that triggered this sudden journey. The face of the man he had always deeply resented was printed in that tiny corner, bringing back a flood of bitter memories. It was none other than his own father, Hovin Portmer, whose cold face was now associated with an obituary. Elric remembers the night he first ran away, clutching a simple sack over his shoulder as he walked into the dark, rainy night. Even back then, a tiny and foolish part of him still held on to a faint, childish hope that his father would actually care. He kept hoping his father would send people to search for him, but looking back now, he realizes how incredibly naive that wish was. Even though his father treated him like a mere tool to elevate the family name, and was the one directly responsible for his mother's tragic passing. Somewhere deep beneath all of that intense resentment, Elric could not completely erase the reality that he was still his father's child. Sitting on the train seat, he holds his head in his hands, mocking himself for ever craving even a tiny scrap of affection from a man who had none to give. But now the object of all his anger and resentment is completely gone. There is no one left to hate. He realizes how pathetic he is, using his father's passing as a convenient excuse to crawl back home after all these years. 10 long years have passed, leaving him with nothing but a lingering sense of deep regret, emptiness, and physical scars. The train finally pulls into the Grand Station, the conductor announcing their arrival at their final destination, Wibben. All he can do now is take a deep breath and take his first steps back into the territory he once called home. Elric steps off the train, looking around at the bustling station with a quiet, thoughtful expression. Even after an entire decade away, the golden landscape of Wibben remains frozen in time, looking exactly as he remembers it. He observes the townspeople walking with unhurried, peaceful steps, a stark contrast to the brutal panic of the war zones. Kids are running around laughing, completely untouched by the harsh and tense atmosphere of the battlefields. Elric survived. Leaning heavily on his cane, Elric limps slowly down the path, the soft rhythmic thuds of his steps echoing his internal anxiety. The golden wheat fields swayed gently in the breeze, looking beautifully familiar yet strangely distant. Everything from the golden light of the setting sun to the vast fields remains entirely unchanged. Memories of his childhood begin to flash before his eyes, like playing hide-and-seek with the local village kids on warm afternoons. He remembers getting playfully scolded by his maid for getting his clothes dirty after running wild through the dirt. He takes a slow breath, whispering to himself about how sharp and clear these old memories still are. A gentle, nostalgic smile starts to touch his lips as he reflects on those simpler times. But suddenly, he stops dead in his tracks, his eyes widening in surprise as he spots something in the distance. His nostalgic smile completely vanishes, replaced by a tense and focused gaze as he stares ahead. A memory of Tyria in her wedding dress flashes through his mind, and he silently wonders if his young lady has been doing well all these years. He had always assumed that since she was so beautiful, someone must have married her and taken her away to a grand life by now. He was absolutely sure of it, convinced she would never remain in this quiet territory after their brief, tragic arrangement. But suddenly, a loud, panicked voice calls out to Lady Tyria. Elric turns his head quickly, his gaze locking onto a young woman standing in the middle of the golden field. A maid is frantically running up to her, scolding her for carrying such heavy loads of wheat all by herself. Elric stands completely frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. He cannot believe she's actually here. He watches as the beautiful blonde woman steps forward, a soft rustle echoing through the tall grass. Underneath a wide sun hat, Tyria holds a bundle of freshly harvested wheat, her gentle green eyes looking exactly the same as the day they first met. Elric is completely speechless, his mind racing. Why is she still here? Why hasn't she left? The two of them stand face to face in the middle of the glowing golden field, the setting sun casting long shadows as they lock eyes for the first time in 10 years. Elric stands face to face with Tyria in the middle of the glowing wheat field. Completely stunned to see her still hanging around after all this time, he asks why she never left. Tyria just looks back at him calmly from under her wide sun hat. Her gentle green eyes lock onto his with absolute patience. Elric waits in tense silence, his breath catching in his throat as he braces for her answer. With a soft and unwavering tone, Tyria delivers a simple but devastating response. She tells him she stayed because she is his wife. The reality of her words hits Elric like a ton of bricks. He looks down in a total panic, finally realizing what an absolute idiot he had been. He naively believed that by vanishing into thin air 10 years ago, their forced political marriage would just magically annul itself. But as she walks ahead of him, the harsh truth sinks in. If breaking that noble contract was actually that easy, she never would have been sold to his merchant family to begin with. He pictures her locked away in a giant thorny cage. His childish and reckless escape didn't save her at all. It just stripped away the very last bit of freedom she had left. While he was out clutching a sword and fighting to survive on blood-soaked battlefields, she was forced to endure the shame and loneliness of his sudden abandonment entirely on her own. He realizes he didn't protect anyone. He was just a selfish man fleeing his own problems. He knows he owes her a massive apology, but he struggles to find the right words to even begin. How is he supposed to face the woman whose life he unintentionally ruined? Standing in the golden light, he looks down, completely paralyzed by guilt. Fumbling over his words, Elric nervously stutters out a greeting as he tries to break the heavy silence between them. His cheeks flush red as he struggles to maintain eye contact, completely overwhelmed by her presence. Tyria looks at him calmly under her sun hat, waiting patiently for him to speak. Seeing him struggle, she gently suggests that they head inside the estate first. With a soft rustle of her dress, she turns and begins walking back toward the grand mansion. Elric slowly follows behind her, his limp making his steps slow and uneven on the dirt path. He silently reflects on how much easier it would have been if she had simply screamed or gotten angry at him for abandoning her. He fully expected her to look at him with deep resentment and accuse him of running off. He prepared himself to hear her ask what he was even doing back here after a whole decade of silence. But her gentle and calm demeanor is far more disarming than any anger, leaving him completely off balance. He watches her walk ahead of him, his red eyes wide with a mixture of awe and lingering guilt. Tyria suddenly stops and turns around, calling out to him. She softly asks if he is coming, a look of genuine curiosity on her face. Elric blinks in surprise, momentarily frozen by her gentle tone. He tightly grips his wooden cane, resolving to face whatever comes next, and softly replies that he is coming. They walk side by side through the vast golden wheat field, heading toward the grand estate together. They arrive at the entrance of the beautiful, sprawling mansion, which looks exactly as it did 10 years ago. Tyria opens the large front doors, stepping inside the quiet foyer. She tells Elric that she is going to call the butler and asks him to wait there for just a moment. Elric stands alone in the hallway, taking in the familiar sights as the front door gently clicks shut. He looks up at the grand architecture of the mansion. It barely feels real that he has actually returned after 10 long years. Everything from the marble pillars to the pristine courtyard fountain outside remains completely unchanged. He looks around the corridor, remembering the exact locations of every window and every minor stain on the walls. A soft, nostalgic smile touches his lips as the memories of his childhood home come rushing back to him. But his quiet reflection is suddenly interrupted by a voice from behind asking who he is. Elric quickly turns around, his hand instinctively resting on his cane. Standing at the end of the hallway is Rhonda, the family's head maid, looking just as pristine and strict as ever. Elric looks at her, a wave of relief washing over him as he softly says her name. He smiles warmly, realizing that even after a decade she hasn't changed a bit. Rhonda tilts her head, looking at the tall, scarred man in front of her with complete confusion. She narrows her eyes behind her glasses, utterly unable to recognize the rugged stranger standing in the hallway. As she stares closer, her eyes suddenly go wide with sheer shock as a wild realization begins to dawn on her. She stutters out in disbelief, asking if it is truly him. With a trembling voice, she gasps out the name of young Master Elric. Rhonda rushes forward and throws her arms around him in a tight hug, tears welling up in her eyes. Elric hugs her back, softly telling her he came home. She pulls back slightly, her face filled with emotion, as she cries that she almost didn't recognize him. She looks him up and down, pointing out how incredibly much he has changed since the day he ran away. Elric offers a gentle, reassuring smile, admitting that he guesses he has indeed changed quite a bit. His expression softens as he looks at her, understanding why she would find his current appearance so startling. Rhonda wipes her tears and reminds him that his wife Tyria is currently waiting for him inside the house. Elric's expression quickly turns serious at the mention of Tyria, his gaze dropping to the floor. He thinks to himself about how he spent the last 10 years fighting on brutal, bloody battlefields. Rhonda notices his sudden change in mood and asks in concern if something is the matter. Elric continues his internal train of thought, realizing how much his body and face must have hardened over a decade of war. If Rhonda, the maid who practically raised him like a parent, couldn't even recognize him at first glance, then how on earth did Tyria, who only saw his 14-year-old face for a single day during their wedding, how did she manage to look at his current scarred face and recognize him in an absolute instant out in the golden wheat field? The realization sends a shiver down his spine as he ponders this bizarre mystery. Later that evening, the heavy velvet curtains of a luxurious bathroom sway gently in the breeze. Elric sits in a steaming bath, trying to wash away the physical and mental exhaustion of his long journey. Through the bathroom window, a figure can be seen quietly looking down at the courtyard below. Elric leans his head back against the rim of the tub, his mind still entirely consumed by the riddle of Tyria's behavior. He mutters to himself, staring up at the ceiling and wondering how she knew it was him. He reaches up, his wet fingers tracing a thick, prominent scar on the back of his neck. He reflects on how his entire body is covered in battle scars that he never had as a child. Even his brown hair is cut differently, and his eyes carry the heavy weariness of a soldier. Literally, none of his physical features from his childhood remained the same. He sits up in the warm water, the steam rising around him as he continues to overthink the situation. He runs a hand over his toned, muscular physique, still completely baffled by her immediate recognition. Deciding he has soaked long enough, he steps out of the tub, water dripping onto the marble floor. He wraps himself in a pristine white bathrobe, tying the sash securely around his waist as he prepares to exit. But just as he turns the corner, Elric lets out a quiet gasp of surprise. Standing right there in the steam-filled dressing room is Tyria, wrapped only in a white bath towel. Tyria's cheeks instantly flush bright red, her eyes wide with shock as she stands frozen in place. She quickly clutches her towel tighter, stammering out a flustered apology as she tries to hide her face. Tears of embarrassment begin to well up in her eyes, making her look incredibly vulnerable. Seeing her start to cry, Elric panics and quickly raises his hands, desperately trying to calm her down and assure her that it is totally fine. Tyria looks up at him through her tears, her golden hair clinging to her damp shoulders. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the room are thrown open with a loud bang, and a voice screams out. The sudden noise startles both of them, their heads snapping toward the entrance. A young, energetic maid barges into the room, shouting in a panic about her lady's safety. The maid freezes in absolute horror as she spots a strange, muscular man standing right next to her wrapped-up lady. Elric stands there awkwardly while Tyria clutches her towel, hiding behind his broad chest. Tyria looks over her shoulder, blushing furiously as she tries to explain the misunderstanding to the panicked maid. Elric's sweat drops, desperately waving his hands to clarify that she almost slipped and he was simply trying to catch her. A strong grip tightens around a sword hilt as we flash back to Elric's days on the battlefield. The cold, focused gaze of a warrior shows he is ready for war. The Chevre border guard stands in neat formations, shields up and spears ready. They are defending the Chevre territory against a massive threat. A highly trained and deadly group, the Imperial Army Elite Assault Unit, is marching forward to break their defenses. Leading the charge is Lebron, a vanguard knight with a terrifyingly confident grin on his face. The commander of the Chevre Guard screams out, ordering his men to charge forward and eliminate the enemy vanguard. Lebron yells out a challenge, taunting the defenders to come at him and promising to strike every single one of them down. He swings his sword with immense force, sending Chevre soldiers flying back like ragdolls. The sheer weight of his brutal attacks completely overwhelms the defenders, leaving blood splattered across the snow. Panic quickly spreads among the Chevre soldiers, who realize they are severely outmatched and scream to retreat. The command is given to fall back behind the main defense line before they are completely wiped out. As the soldiers retreat in a panic, a lone figure walks calmly in the opposite direction toward the enemy. The retreating commander spots the young warrior, wondering who in the world this man is, and if he is just a hired sword. It is Elric. He walks calmly onto the battlefield, a large sword resting casually on his shoulder. Lebron notices the new opponent and immediately lunges forward, aiming a powerful strike at Elric's head. But Elric easily parries the attack with lightning speed, the sound of metal clashing echoing across the field. He holds his ground effortlessly, his cold eyes showing no signs of strain or worry as Lebron pushes against his blade. With a swift and decisive motion, Elric counterattacks, cutting down Lebron in a split second. He seamlessly moves to the next enemy, slicing through an Imperial soldier who tries to attack from behind. He dances through the enemy ranks, his blade moving in a blur as he strikes down Imperial soldiers one by one. He leaves a trail of defeated enemies in his wake, standing completely victorious as the remaining Imperial troops halt in fear. The Imperial soldiers sweat in pure terror, unable to comprehend the monstrous strength of the young mercenary. Elric stands calmly amidst the fallen, introducing himself as Kasha, a mercenary knight in service of Chevre. He looks at the surviving soldiers with a cold, piercing gaze, challenging them to step forward if they have the nerve. Suddenly, a massive energy signature begins to gather, and Elric's danger senses spike as he realizes a powerful attack is coming. An unseen enemy unleashes a devastating mana blast, prompting Elric to quickly put up his magical mana shield to block the hit. The explosion rips through the snowy ground, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris. Elric is pushed back, his armor battered and bloody as he struggles to stand using his sword for support. He grits his teeth in pain, realizing that the enemies he faced were far more dangerous than he originally anticipated. High up on a rocky cliff overlooking the battlefield, two mysterious figures in top hats and goggles watch the scene unfold. They carry high-tech firearms, their cold masked faces suggesting they are the ones who orchestrated the powerful blast. Suddenly, Elric wakes up with a gasp, his eyes wide with terror as he realizes he was just having a nightmare about his past. He sits up in his bed, panting heavily as sweat pours down his face, the memories of that brutal battle still fresh in his mind. He clutches his head, trying to calm his racing heart and separate the horrific memories from his peaceful reality. He looks down at his trembling hands, the physical and mental scars of his mercenary days serving as a constant reminder of what he went through. He slowly swings his legs out of bed, staring blankly at the floor as he tries to shake off the lingering dread of the nightmare. He looks around his luxurious, quiet bedroom, the bright morning light filtering through the large windows. He whispers to himself, trying to reassure his racing mind that he has indeed come back home and is safe. But his hypervigilance kicks in as he hears a sudden noise at the bedroom door, his hand instinctively reaching for a hidden blade. A polite voice calls out from the hallway, asking if the young master is awake yet. Elric hesitates, his eyes narrow as he slowly lowers his weapon, realizing it is just the household staff. He clears his throat and quietly replies that he is indeed awake. He stands up and walks over to the window, the bright morning sun reflecting off his face. Rhonda and another maid enter the room, carrying a fresh set of clothes and a bowl of water for his morning routine. The moment Elric asks for some cold water to wash his face, a gourd filled to the brim with ice-cold water is presented to him in an instant. He gets dressed in the clean, high-quality clothes, noting how incredibly light and soft the fabric feels against his skin. He stands before a full-length mirror, adjusting his collar as he looks at his reflection. He silently thinks that this level of comfort is far more than he deserves. He stares at his face in the mirror, noting how different he looks compared to the wild, rugged mercenary he used to be. He tries to smile, but it feels forced and unnatural. He wonders if his years on the battlefield have permanently carved the warmth out of his expression. He opens the bedroom door and steps out, where Rhonda is waiting patiently to guide him. Rhonda looks at him and smiles warmly, saying that dressed like that he finally looks like a proper noble master. But as they begin to walk, Rhonda notices his heavy limp and asks in concern what happened to his leg. A flashback shows a wounded Elric sitting on a dark battlefield, clutching his bloodied knee. He remembers how a bullet buried itself deep in his joint during a chaotic skirmish. Elric brushes it off with a polite laugh, telling Rhonda that yesterday's stumble was simply a minor misunderstanding and nothing to worry about. As they walk down the hall, they hear the sound of footsteps approaching. Elric turns his head and spots Tyria walking toward them, looking absolutely radiant in the morning light. She smiles gently and asks him if he slept well last night. Instantly, the memory of last night's embarrassing bathhouse encounter flashes in his mind, making him blush furiously. He stutters out a nervous reply, thanking her and trying to look anywhere but at her face. Suddenly, the young maid from last night, Marie, points a finger at him and loudly calls him a pervert. Rhonda immediately gives Marie a firm disciplinary chop on the head, scolding her for her extreme rudeness. Tyria politely intervenes, expressing her hope that Elric's stay at the estate will be a pleasant and comfortable one. Elric clears his throat awkwardly and quickly changes the subject, saying he slept quite soundly. He gives a nervous, sweat-dropping smile, trying his best to salvage whatever dignity he has left. As they walk toward the dining room, Elric asks Tyria about the young maid Marie, noting that he doesn't recall seeing her before he left. Tyria explains that Marie was hired not too long ago. Elric winces as Marie continues to glare at him from behind. He assures Tyria that it is completely fine and urges her not to worry about the minor misunderstanding. He firmly grips his cane as they step into the dining room, ready to enjoy a quiet breakfast. He sits down at the table, quietly explaining that he was simply curious, since he didn't recognize her face. Tyria nods understandingly, her green eyes looking soft and gentle as she listens to him. They sit across from each other at the long dining table, the quiet clinking of cutlery filling the elegant room. Tyria takes a delicate bite of her food, looking peaceful and content. Elric hesitates for a moment before clearing his throat, stating that there is something important they need to address. He looks at her earnestly, preparing to bring up the awkward events of the previous night. Tyria blushes slightly, immediately realizing he is talking about the bathhouse incident. Elric lowers his head and offers a sincere apology, wanting to make sure she knows it was a complete accident. Tyria quickly waves her hands, telling him that it is completely fine and urging him to just eat his breakfast. She looks down at her hands, her cheeks flushed a bright pink as she mutters that she understands. Elric looks at her flushed face, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering embarrassment. He quietly whispers her name, touched by her kind and forgiving nature. Later that morning, Elric stands in his room, looking down at his scarred body. He traces the deep scars covering his chest and arms, wondering what kind of life he must have lived to carry so much damage. He sighs, wishing he had just kept his mouth shut instead of bringing up the awkward bathhouse incident again. He sweat drops, thinking to himself that the overwhelming tension in this house is going to be the absolute death of him. We cut back to the breakfast table, where Elric is aggressively digging into his food, shoveling forkfuls of breakfast into his mouth. Marie and another maid watch in absolute shock as the young master eats like a feral beast, completely discarding his noble manners. Elric finishes his plate in record time and proudly gives a thumbs up, completely stuffed. The maids politely bow and take their leave, leaving the couple alone once again. Tyria watches them leave, a soft, warm smile appearing on her face. She looks at Elric and wishes him a wonderful day ahead, her eyes filled with genuine warmth. After breakfast, Elric decides to take a walk around the grand estate, noting how lively and bustling it is. With Rhonda leading the way, Elric goes around to greet each of the household staff members. To his surprise, every single one of them welcomes him home with open arms and genuine warmth. An older butler laughs, commenting on how Elric is a real man now after returning from the battlefield. Marie stands in the background, her face red with frustration as she grumbles about him being a pervert. The butler jovially tells everyone to use their heads and stop teasing the young master. Marie grumbles that coming back after 10 years just to pull off stunts like that is ridiculous. The older butler chuckles and tells her not to be so incredibly hard on the young master. He proudly states that the foremost duty of any noble is to secure a proper heir for the family. The butler winks, suggesting that Elric was simply doing his noble duty by seeking out his wife in the bathhouse. Marie looks disgusted while the rest of the staff laughs at the butler's wild theories. The butler turns to Elric and asks if this means he has finally come home to stay and build a family. Elric can only offer a nervous, sweat-dropping laugh. Elric tightly grips his cane, admitting to himself that he still hasn't made up his mind about what comes next. He knows his injured knee will keep him grounded at the estate for the foreseeable future, whether he likes it or not. After all this time, he couldn't simply walk back in and claim this peaceful estate as his own. He tells the staff that he needs to head out for a bit and promises they can talk more when he returns. He instructs the stablemaster to have a carriage readied for his journey. A carriage travels down the dirt road, kicking up dust as it cuts through the vast golden wheat fields. Tyria stands in the field, watching the carriage depart with a quiet, thoughtful expression. Her golden hair sways in the wind under her large sun hat as she watches him go. The carriage travels along a beautiful autumn road covered in fallen red and orange leaves. Elric arrives at a quiet, secluded cemetery on a hill overlooking the vast territory. He steps out of the carriage, the dry autumn leaves crunching beneath his boots. He gazes at a grand gravestone, a solemn expression on his face as he mutters that it has been far too long. He stands before the stone monument, whispering a single heavy word to his father. Elric stands before his father's grave, the cold autumn wind blowing through his hair as he reflects on his past. He silently admits to himself that he held a deep, burning resentment toward the man. He gazes at the stone monument, noting that never once did he wish for them to meet again under these circumstances. His mind drifts back to his father, Hovin Portmer, a man who built a massive merchant empire from scratch, but possessed an incredibly cold and heartless soul. Elric speaks to the gravestone, asking if his father ever once turned that cold face toward him in a genuine warm smile. He bitterly wonders if even a single kind word ever passed those lips for his sake during his entire childhood. The wind howls softly through the quiet cemetery as he stands there, letting the silent air absorb his heavy words. He stands completely silent for a long moment, the dry leaves rustling around his boots. Elric takes a deep breath and admits that he no longer harbors the exact same intense hatred he once did. His expression softens as he looks down, the bitter anger slowly giving way to a quiet, weary acceptance of the past. His red eyes remain fixed on the engraved name of his father, finding a strange sense of closure in the quiet graveyard. Rhonda's companion, the loyal butler Aldio, approaches Elric from behind and respectfully explains how his father met his end. He reveals that his father suffered from a severe disease of the heart. Aldio explains that his father concealed his worsening condition right up until the very end, so only his personal physician knew the truth. As his final days drew closer, his father devoted himself entirely to shutting down his merchant enterprises and turning them all into liquid assets. Elric turns to the butler with a dry, self-deprecating smile. He asks Aldio what he could have possibly seen in that cold, unyielding man that made him follow him so faithfully. Elric chuckles softly, calling Aldio an incredibly odd person for dedicating his life to such a merciless master. Aldio merely smiles warmly, showing no offense as he maintains his absolute respect for both the late master and the young master. Elric asks him if he ever once questioned his father's cold actions or decisions. Aldio reveals that the late master converted all of his immense wealth and business holdings into solid gold and safe assets. He looks Elric dead in the eye and delivers a shocking piece of news. The entire sum has been left completely to Elric. Elric is left stunned as they walk back down the hill together, trying to process this unexpected inheritance. The carriage doors click shut as Elric and Aldio climb inside, preparing to head back to the estate. Sitting inside the carriage, Elric rests his chin on his hand, asking if his father really left no formal official will behind. Aldio explains that his father was never the type to do such a sentimental thing, leaving only strict written directions regarding the disposition of his assets. He offers to present those documents to Elric if he wishes to inspect them, though his father's true intentions remain a mystery. Elric sits back with a sigh, noting that his father dealt with his own death and legacy even more coldly than usual. The carriage travels swiftly down the sun-drenched road, carrying them away from the quiet cemetery. Elric gazes out the window with a look of quiet intensity, his thoughts drifting to a far more pressing matter. He thinks about Tyria, the golden-haired lady who was sold to his family a decade ago. he mutters to himself, wondering why she is still living in the Portmer Manor. Given how he ran away, the political marriage should have been nullified long ago. Aldio explains that, since it was a political match and a business deal to begin with, the late master handled the situation with strict practicality. Elric asks if that reason alone was enough to keep Tyria tied to their household for an entire decade. Aldio clarifies that there is one more crucial detail he failed to mention. He explains that the Portmer family now holds a hereditary barony. The carriage wheels creak as they turn, the grand estate slowly coming into view in the distance. They pull up to the front entrance of the majestic white pillared mansion under a clear blue sky. Elric steps out of the carriage, the soft thud of his boots landing on the driveway. Aldio explains that it has already been a full year since the master died. Aldio notes that if Tyria had been after money or status, she could have easily claimed the entire estate on Elric's behalf and departed long ago. Instead, she chose to remain at the manor entirely of her own free will. Elric asks him if he knows why she would make such a choice. Aldio admits that Tyria is a woman of very few words, and not one to indulge in much idle talk. He regrets to say that they never became close enough to share such private confidences, as she always carried an air of distant nobility. Elric sighs, realizing Tyria is a highly complex and difficult person to understand. He admits that she is still a total stranger to him, as he only ever saw her face once. Aldio chuckles softly, understanding the young master's confusion as they walk toward the front doors. Elric slowly limps up the stone steps of the mansion, relying heavily on his wooden cane. As he reaches the entrance, he spots Tyria standing near a marble pillar, looking out over the golden fields. Tyria turns her head slightly as she hears his uneven footsteps, her golden hair catching the warm sunlight. She nervously clasps her hands together, a quiet blush appearing on her pale cheeks. She turns fully to face him, holding a small sack as she stands in her simple, elegant dress. Elric walks up to her with a polite, friendly smile, asking if she has just returned from the fields. Tyria looks at him in slight surprise, asking when he got back from his carriage trip. She explains that she was just tending to the wheat fields, looking incredibly graceful despite her dusty boots. Elric's cheeks flush slightly as he looks at her, captivated by her natural elegance. Tyria smiles softly and agrees, stepping through the grand entrance alongside him. They walk side by side up the grand carpeted staircase of the manor, their footsteps echoing quietly in the spacious hall. Elric struggles to keep the conversation going, his internal monologue cursing his own clumsy tongue for always making things awkward. He glances at her from the side, noting how even in her simple everyday clothes, she still carries herself like a high-born noble. He silently thinks to himself that her kind of elegant, commanding presence is something people are born with, not made. He wonders if she was always like this, even back when they first stood at the altar 10 years ago. Suddenly, Elric's injured leg buckles beneath him, and he loses his balance with a sharp gasp of pain. Tyria quickly reaches out in a panic, asking him if he is all right as he stumbles on the stairs. Elric quickly catches himself with his cane, his hand gripping the wood tightly as he stabilizes himself. He gives her a reassuring but embarrassed smile, insisting that he is perfectly fine and just lost his footing for a split second. He laughs weakly, noting how incredibly embarrassing it is to have his wife witness his physical weakness. He explains that with his leg in this condition, he cannot carry anything for her, and offers a sincere apology. He thinks to himself how brazen it is of him to offer a late apology after abandoning her for 10 years. Tyria looks at him with soft, understanding eyes, quietly stating that she has simply grown used to the hard work over the years. Elric pauses, realizing her words imply she was forced to take over the management of the entire estate after he fled. He notes that she sounds exactly like his father. He remembers how his father was the sort of man who could never rest until he had personally confirmed every single matter of importance. His father had shut down all other businesses, leaving only a single massive freight farm in Wibben. He stops walking, his boots coming to a complete halt on the polished floor. He turns to her and hesitantly asks how his father spent his final days at the manor. They stand before a grand gilded portrait of his father hanging on the wall, the heavy frame casting a shadow over them. Tyria explains that his father spent his remaining days teaching her exactly how to run and manage the estate. Elric's grip on his cane tightens as he prepares himself to ask a far more painful and personal question. With a serious, tense expression, he asks if his father ever once, even in his final moments, mentioned him. Tyria looks at him with a gentle and slightly sad expression, and quietly delivers the truth. He did not. The silence stretches between them, a cold, frosty father and a woman of very few words. Elric looks down, a self-deprecating smile on his lips as he murmurs that any conversation between them must have been strictly business. He stares at his father's portrait, accepting the reality that his father never truly cared about him as a son, even in death. Tyria politely excuses herself, stating that she must return to her office to continue her daily work. Elric is surprised, pointing out that he thought she was done with her duties for the day. Tyria explains that she still has a mountain of documents and paperwork to review before she can rest. Elric looks at her in disbelief, asking if she truly works all day in the fields and all night on paperwork. She offers a quiet nod, saying she will see him again at the dinner table before turning to walk away. Elric watches her walk down the long hallway, his expression turning solemn. In that exact moment, a massive wave of pity and intense guilt crashes over his soul. He realizes that if he hadn't run away like a coward, all of this heavy responsibility should have been his. He pushed his own family duties onto her shoulders while he lived in relative comfort on the battlefield, swinging a sword. He wishes she would at least yell at him or express some anger, as it would easily ease his heavy conscience. Suddenly, a loud crash and a startled scream echo from the end of the corridor, snapping him out of his thoughts. Elric rushes toward the sound and finds the young maid Marie sitting flat on her bottom, surrounded by scattered letters and papers. Marie sits on the floor, looking utterly flustered and embarrassed as she rubs her sore head. Elric walks up to her, a sweat drop on his face as he asks her if she is all right. Marie panics, waving her hands and stammering that she is completely fine and doesn't need any help. Despite his injured leg, Elric kneels down on the floor and begins to help her gather the scattered envelopes. As he picks them up, Elric asks her what all of these letters are. Marie explains that they are formal letters addressed to her lady Tyria. Elric takes one of the envelopes, noting how thick and heavy it is as he flips it over. He is surprised by the sheer quantity, commenting that there are an incredibly large number of letters. But as his eyes lock onto the sender's name on the front of the envelope, his friendly expression instantly turns deadly serious. The name written in elegant cursive on the paper is none other than the Wibben family. The letters are from Tyria's original noble household, the very family that sold her to the Portmers a decade ago. Sitting alone in his office, Elric unfurls one of the letters from the Wibben family, his face a mask of quiet concentration. He begins to read the letter, which urges Tyria to return home, claiming she has endured enough hardship and that 10 years of waiting is far too long for a man who will never return. The letter also mentions that his late father Hovin turned all of his family assets into cash but left her absolutely nothing, comparing her treatment to that of a milk cow. Elric taps his finger on the paper, realizing that if Tyria had chosen to claim everything as her own, it would have been no more than what she was truly owed for her sacrifice. He looks around his study, deeply confused as to why she chose to stay at the Portman estate and manage his family's inheritance instead. He rests his hand against his face, wondering if there is a deeper reason behind her stubborn loyalty to a house that treated her so coldly. Elric sits at his desk, leaning forward in deep thought as he stares at the letter in front of him. His red eyes narrow as he analyzes every possibility. If she stayed for the sake of the inheritance, why on earth would she work so fiercely and selflessly to protect it? If she had simply wanted the wealth, she could have taken her share and walked away a whole year ago when his father passed. Elric ponders the mystery, trying to reconcile the cold reality of their arranged marriage with her incredibly dedicated actions. He opens a wooden drawer on his desk, discovering a hidden stack of several more letters tied with red wax seals. He sifts through the envelopes, realizing that the Wibben family has been desperately sending these letters for quite some time, demanding her return. Every single letter tucked away in that drawer had started arriving exactly 1 year earlier, right around the time of his father's death. Elric lets out a heavy sigh, realizing that she has been quietly guarding the estate and withholding the truth this entire time. He sits alone in the spacious, dimly lit office, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the responsibility she carried in his absence. She spent a whole year protecting the Portman legacy for a master who might have never returned from the war. And since not even Aldeo knew about these letters, Tyria must have hidden the truth incredibly well to prevent any outside interference. Elric looks out the window, watching Tyria work diligently in the golden fields alongside the other laborers. For an entire year, she fought this lone battle completely by herself, carrying the heavy weight of the estate on her own shoulders. He looks at her with a gentle, appreciative gaze, noting her quiet resilience and dedication. He smiles sadly, thinking to himself that even if she had taken the entire inheritance for herself, he would have had absolutely no grounds to resent her. But instead of taking the easy way out, she chose to stay and preserve everything he left behind. Meanwhile, inside a luxurious dressing room, Tyria sits before a large mirror, her long golden hair cascading down her back. She reaches up and gently clips her hair back, preparing herself for a formal meeting. She looks at her reflection with a quiet, determined expression, adjusting her elegant blue gown. Her maid Marie stands behind her with a bright, excited smile, clasping her hands together. Marie squeals in delight, saying that at long last the young master has finally asked to see her first. Even though his previous behavior in the bathhouse was rather indecent, Marie admits that the butler Aldeo mentioned they should try to grow closer. Tyria looks back in slight confusion, her cheeks flushing pink at the mention of the bathhouse. Marie hops around excitedly, her eyes sparkling as she thinks about the future. She dramatically clutches Tyria's gown, getting overly passionate about the couple's relationship. She kneels before her lady, looking completely invested in her master's romantic life. Marie exclaims that, even if Elric is a bit of a scoundrel for abandoning her, they need to actually build a close relationship now. She looks up with a hilariously intense face, boldly telling Tyria that she should hurry up and share a bed with him. Tyria blushes furiously at her maid's blunt advice, her eyes wide with embarrassment as she tries to process the suggestion. A sudden knock on the door cuts through the awkward tension in the room. Aldio's voice calls out from the hallway, asking if her ladyship is ready to leave for her meeting with Elric. Tyria takes a deep breath to compose herself and replies that she is coming out now. As they walk down the corridor together, Tyria silently wonders what exactly Elric wants to discuss with her. This is the first time since his return that he is personally asked to meet with her in private. Aldio opens the double doors to the drawing room, announcing Tyria's arrival. Tyria steps into the room, her elegant blue dress rustling softly against the polished floorboards. She walks toward the table where Elric is sitting quietly, a tea set prepared between them. Elric holds one of the letters in his hand, his expression serious as he watches her approach. He carefully sets the paper down, preparing to address the difficult topic of her family's demands. They sit across from each other in a spacious sunlit parlor, a heavy silence settling over the room. Elric begins by offering a sincere apology, admitting that he opened her private letters without her permission. He explains that the envelopes were mixed in with the household mail, and his curiosity got the better of him when he saw the sender. Tyria looks down, her eyes hidden in shadow, as she silently absorbs his words. The tension in the room increases as they both remain quiet, the reality of the situation hanging between them. Elric directly points out that she spent the past year completely ignoring every single one of these letters from her family. He leans forward and asks her the one question that has been burning in his mind. He asks why she chose to safeguard his share of the inheritance when there was absolutely no guarantee he would ever return. To him, she was nothing more than a stranger, a woman so distant that her choice to protect his legacy seemed completely inexplicable. He sits back, his eyes locked onto her as he waits for an answer. Tyria tightly grips her dress, her hands trembling slightly as she prepares to speak. She looks him dead in the eye and firmly declares her identity as Tyria Portman. Her voice carries a fierce, unwavering determination that catches Elric completely off guard. She repeats that she is no longer the Lady of Wibben, but rather the mistress of Portman. With a polite but firm tone, she stands up and excuses herself, stating that she still has many duties to attend to. She turns and begins to walk out of the parlor, her footsteps clicking sharply on the floor. Elric watches her leave, his expression a mix of surprise and deep respect for her fierce pride. He looks at her retreating figure, realizing how much strength and dignity she possesses. He calls out to her, asking once more why she chose to protect his inheritance instead of keeping it all for herself. Tyria pauses, keeping her back turned as she prepares her response. She takes a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She turns her head slightly and repeats her simple, powerful answer. She is his wife. With that final declaration, she exits the room, leaving Elric alone with his thoughts. Elric sits back in his chair, a look of quiet realization washing over his face. Her words carry the immense weight of a noblewoman's responsibility and duty, a concept he knows all too well. As the mistress of Portman, she took it upon herself to safeguard everything that remained of the Portman estate. She didn't do it for personal gain or out of greed, but out of a deep, unshakable sense of marital obligation. Looking at her, Elric is suddenly reminded of someone from his past who carried that exact same rigid devotion to duty. He remembers a young, silver-haired knight whom he first crossed paths with on a bloody battlefield years ago. The man was the third son of a noble house leading a fierce war for territory. They fought side by side in a brutal conflict, their blades moving in perfect harmony as they cut down enemy forces. They won that war with minimal losses, but it was far from a perfect, clean victory. The silver-haired knight, Elvis Graham, carried himself with a terrifyingly serious demeanor, always preaching about the burdens of nobility. Elvis, who was confined to a wheelchair after losing his legs in battle, often lectured Elric about how those born noble are bound by responsibility and duty. He believed that because they stand in positions others envy, they must live in a way that sets a proper example. Elvis had mockingly pointed out that Elric was just a commoner's son, half noble and half commoner. He argued that by shoulder-carrying half of those heavy responsibilities, he had sacrificed half of his body. Therefore, Elvis believed it was only fair that he spend the rest of his days living a carefree, comfortable life. And he lived exactly as he said he would, leaving the battlefield behind and getting married a few years later. Back in his office, Elric gently slides his dagger back into its sheath, the sharp click of the blade echoing in the quiet room. He reflects on the concept of responsibility and duty, realizing that Tyria carries that same heavy burden. He knows he can never truly repay the 10 long years of life she gave up to protect his family's name, but that doesn't mean there is absolutely nothing he can do to help her now. He looks at the stack of unopened envelopes, knowing that more letters from her family will undoubtedly keep arriving. The Wibben family is clearly obsessed with claiming the Portman inheritance and will persist until they get what they want. They demand a reply but never once show up in person, suggesting they are unable to come rather than unwilling. Elric realizes that even if he questions Tyria directly, her proud nature means she will never explain her inner thoughts. But fortunately, there is a very simple and direct way for a warrior like him to uncover the truth. He decides to take a carriage ride directly to the Wibben estate to investigate the situation himself. He arrives at the grand rusted iron gates of the imposing Wibben manor under a clear blue sky. He looks up at the massive, slightly decaying noble estate, a cold, determined smile appearing on his face as he prepares to settle this once and for all. At the majestic Wibben estate, the lord and lady are fuming about Elric's unexpected return. They march down the hallway, cursing the fact that he has decided to show his face after 10 long years of silence. The lady waves her fan, declaring that he is nothing but a useless commoner who has never contributed anything of value to society. The lord is furious, suspecting that Elric has only returned to sniff around and claim his rightful share of the Portman inheritance. He grits his teeth, his expression twisting with greed as he plots how to keep all of that immense wealth for himself. They march toward the guest parlor, ready to confront the young master of Portman. They step inside, their heavy synchronized footsteps echoing sharply in the luxurious room. The Lord of Wibben stands tall, whispering bitterly about how a low-born commoner like Elric only cares about money. The lady chimes in, complaining that because of his family, their daughter Tyria threw away 10 years of her life in that merchant household. The Lord looks extremely smug, convinced he holds all the cards in this confrontation. They walk down the grand corridor, ready to meet their guest face to face. The double doors are thrown open, and Elric enters the formal room, his posture calm and dignified. He holds his cane firmly as he steps inside, his gaze steady as he prepares to address the hostile nobles. Elric bows politely, introducing himself and offering a formal apology for taking so long to pay his respects. The Lord of Wibben sits across from him with a cold, sarcastic smile, commenting on how incredibly difficult it has been to see him in person. They sit at a long, beautifully decorated table, the atmosphere in the spacious room thick with unspoken tension. The Lord sneers, stating that since they have finally met, this conversation should proceed as quickly as possible. He claims he only sent those letters out of a parent's deep worry for their daughter. He arrogantly points out that they took an insignificant family of common origin and elevated them to the nobility through this match. He accuses Elric of being incredibly shameless, pointing out that he simply abandoned Tyria and ran off into the night. He mentions the considerable fortune left behind by Elric's late father, suggesting they have a rightful claim to it. He looks down at Elric, stating that their daughter was the one who oversaw the remains of that estate, not him. The Lord openly mocks Elric's abilities, expressing severe doubts that he possesses either the competence or the right to manage his father's inheritance. The lady covers her face with her fan, putting on a dramatic show of sorrow as she laments how terribly their poor daughter must have suffered. They suggest that given the circumstances, it would be far more reasonable for the Wibben family to handle the inheritance in her stead. The Lord boasts that they are the only ones who truly know how to put such a massive fortune to proper use. Elric lets out a quiet sigh, his expression darkening as he listens to their transparent lies. He thinks to himself about how incredibly disgusting and greedy they are. They dress up their pure, unadulterated greed with fine words, but their intentions are completely obvious. They don't care about Tyria's well-being in the slightest. All they want is to strip away whatever is left of the Portman land and line their own pockets. Elric sits quietly, listening to their self-righteous demands while keeping his emotions completely in check. He looks at them with a cold, piercing gaze, the sheer hypocrisy of their words making his skin crawl. He calmly speaks up, first apologizing for not bringing his wife along with him today. He explains that Tyria is currently far too busy managing her extensive daily duties at the manor to travel. The Lord of Wibben slams his hand on the table in a sudden fit of rage, his face twisting with anger. He shouts at Elric, ordering him to stop being so greedy and just hand over the inheritance immediately. He demands to know what right a runaway has to claim the estate now. He asks how one man can possibly be so unbelievably avaricious and selfish. Elric rests his face in his hand, letting out a long, heavy sigh at the sheer absurdity of their projection. He slowly lowers his hand, his red eyes glowing with a cold, terrifying intensity that instantly silences the room. With a calm, steady voice, Elric asks what exactly they intend to do if he chooses to keep the inheritance for himself. He challenges them to go ahead and speak, demanding to know what they can actually do to him now that he is back. The Lord of Wibin stands up quickly, his hand slamming onto the polished table in sheer fury. He yells out in a panic, calling Elric an incredibly insolent and disrespectful commoner. He tells Elric that he has finally realized his true lower position, assuming the threat of noble authority is enough to break him. A quick flashback of Elric's bloody mercenary days shows him standing on a flaming battlefield. He knows there is absolutely no reason to lash out needlessly in anger. Even if he attaches no grand heroic meaning to his past actions, the bloody reality of his battle experience remains a part of him. Compared to the horrors and life-or-death struggles of actual war, these greedy nobles are nothing more than pathetic clowns. The Lord of Wibin stands there sweating, momentarily taken aback by the dark, heavy aura radiating from the young master. Elric offers a cold, mocking smile. He points out that the person with the most legitimate legal claim to this inheritance is none other than his wife Tyria. He stands up calmly and turns around, his coat fluttering as he prepares to make his exit. As he walks away, the Lord of Wibin screams after him, threatening to go straight to the Portman estate and rip him to pieces. Without even looking back, Elric coldly tells him that he will be waiting. His carriage travels away from the Wibin estate, the horses' hooves clattering loudly on the sunny road. Inside the carriage, Elric looks out the window, his expression highly solemn and thoughtful. He covers his face with his hand, letting out a long, heavy sigh as the adrenaline of the confrontation fades. He silently reflects on his own actions, wondering if he is really any different from those vile, greedy nobles. He thinks back to his cold behavior during the meeting, telling himself to keep his empty greed and pride from ruling him. He wonders if his sudden desire to protect Tyria's inheritance was just him indulging in his own twisted sense of superiority. He admits that what he felt back there wasn't pure, selfless compassion for Tyria, but rather a strange, dark surge of satisfaction. The cold, calculating eyes of his father flash in his mind. He realizes with a shudder that he is acting exactly like the man he hated. Suddenly, a wave of intense, burning pain shoots to his body, and Elric is forced to lean against the carriage wall. The coachman outside hears the violent coughing and asks in concern if the young master is all right. Elric violently coughs up a thick splash of blood, his face pale as he grips his chest in absolute agony. He pants heavily, his red eyes wide with fear and physical exhaustion as he struggles to catch his breath. He wipes his mouth, whispering to himself that he really is a wretched, broken excuse for a human being. The carriage pulls up to the Portman estate, stopping quietly in the golden field under the warm afternoon sun. Elric steps out of the carriage, trying to compose himself as he hears a sudden rustling sound in the wheat fields. He turns his head, his eyes scanning the golden stalks of wheat. He blinks in surprise as he spots a familiar figure standing in the middle of the field. It's Tyria, her golden hair catching the bright sunlight as she works quietly. She looks like an absolute goddess in the golden field, her peaceful presence instantly cutting through his dark thoughts. Elric looks at her, his voice a soft, gentle whisper as he calls out her name. His heart aches as he takes a slow, heavy step toward her, his cane sinking into the soft dirt. He runs forward as fast as his injured leg can carry him, completely ignoring the pain as he rushes to her side. He thinks of his late father, his own actions, and the immense burden she has had to carry entirely on her own. Rhonda and Marie watch in complete surprise as the young master suddenly bolts past them into the field. Tyria turns her head as she hears his frantic approach, looking at him with wide, gentle green eyes. Elric suddenly falls to his knees right in front of her, his hands trembling as he gently clutches her arms. He lowers his head, resting it against her dress in a gesture of absolute surrender and vulnerability. With a cracking emotional voice, he whispers his apologies to her. Tyria looks down at him in pure shock, her golden eyes wide as she processes his sudden heartfelt breakdown. He begs for her forgiveness, apologizing for abandoning her and leaving her completely alone to face 10 long years of hardship. He acknowledges that every single pain and struggle she was forced to endure is a heavy sin that he must bear for the rest of his life. We flash back to a warm summer day in Wibin 10 years ago. Young Tyria is walking through the woods carrying her parasol when she hears a rustle nearby. She spots a young brown-haired boy sitting in the grass holding a makeshift sword. She quietly walks up and asks him if those wild dogs bit him. The young boy, Elric, looks up in surprise, trying to hide the fact that his leg is heavily scratched and bleeding. He loudly insists that the dogs didn't bite him, they just went and tore up his leg a little bit. Tyria kneels down next to him, her expression soft as she asks him to come closer so she can inspect the wound. The young Elric blushes furiously, stuttering out his name and explaining that this happened on his family's land, so there is absolutely no need to thank him. Tyria remains quiet, focused on his leg as she carefully cleans the scratches. Elric grumbles, asking if she is always this quiet and stating it wouldn't kill her to get on his good side, since he is going to be a royal knight someday. Tyria quietly wraps a clean bandage around his leg, her touch incredibly gentle and precise. With a soft pat, she stands back up, declaring that his leg is now completely patched up. Young Elric looks down at the bandage, blushing deeply as he mutters a quiet, "Thank you." He looks up at her, asking where a noble lady like her learned how to treat injuries so well. Tyria quietly holds her parasol, whispering that her nanny used to treat her whenever she got hurt. Elric cups his hands around his ear, complaining that he cannot hear her and asking her to talk louder. Tyria blushes slightly, looking down with a shy, embarrassed expression under her parasol. Elric crosses his arms, teasingly asking how she expects to survive in the world being so incredibly shy. He notes that, if she keeps this up, she won't even manage to find a husband. He boasts that once he becomes a legendary royal knight, he might consider taking her as his bride to protect her. Tyria's heart skips a beat at his bold declaration, her golden eyes wide with shock and a deep blush spreading across her face. Young Elric immediately panics, his face turning bright red as he yells that he only said that because she is good at healing, and urges her not to let it go to her head. Tyria remains completely silent, turning around to walk away as Elric screams after her, begging her to wait and claiming she is ignoring him to the very end. Tyria walks away with a soft content smile, holding her parasol high as she departs. In her room, the young Tyria holds a framed portrait of the young Elric, a look of quiet longing in her eyes as she murmurs his name. She reflects on how he never managed to fulfill his childhood dream of becoming a royal knight, yet their paths crossed once again under such tragic circumstances. The flashback ends as evening falls over the Portman estate, the windows of the grand mansion glowing warmly. Rhonda and Tyria walk down the corridor together, their footsteps echoing quietly in the spacious hall. Tyria looks focused and serious, prepared for her highly anticipated meeting with the young master. As she reaches the door of the parlor, she takes a deep breath, wondering what exactly he wants to discuss with her. Rhonda knocks on the wooden door, announcing to the young master that the lady has arrived. The door opens, revealing Elric sitting calmly at a table, a formal tea set prepared for them. Tyria steps inside, nervously stating that she has something important she needs to say to him. Elric looks up at her, his expression serious but incredibly gentle as he prepares to speak. He quietly begins by offering a sincere, deeply felt apology to his wife. Tyria is caught completely off guard, blinking in surprise as she asks what he means. Elric explains that he wants to apologize for everything, especially for running away on their wedding day and leaving her completely behind. He admits that back then he was incredibly foolish, reckless, and entirely blind to the severe consequences of his actions. He acknowledges that she was forced to endure all of the pain, gossip, and hardships of managing this massive estate entirely on her own. He looks at her with a pleading expression, quietly asking if she can find it in her heart to accept his apology. Tyria looks at him in surprise, her eyes soft as she processes his heartfelt confession. She gently explains that she has never held a grudge against anyone, and that choosing to remain at the Portman estate was entirely her own decision. She looks at him softly, adding that if leaving it unsaid would leave his heart unsettled, she will gladly accept his apology. A soft, warm smile finally appears on her face, making Elric's heart skip a beat as he stares at her. Elric's face instantly softens, a gentle and happy smile spreading across his lips. He looks at her warmly, thanking her from the bottom of his heart for her immense kindness. The two of them begin walking down the hallway together, the heavy tension from before completely gone. Tyria notices his slow pace and gently asks if his injured leg is feeling any better today. Elric smiles and assures her that he is doing all right, but quickly shifts the focus to her, saying he is sorry for taking up her precious time. Tyria politely tells him not to say such things, as spending time with him is never a burden. She hesitates for a moment, her cheeks flushing a light pink as she prepares to ask a personal favor. With a quiet, trembling voice, she asks if he could perhaps start calling her something other than lady. Elric is caught off guard by her request, blinking in confusion as he asks her to repeat what she said. Suddenly, the double doors are kicked open as Marie barges into the parlor, loudly announcing that it is tea time. But in her extreme excitement, Marie completely trips over her own feet, sending the heavy tea tray flying into the air. Marie screams in a panic as she goes flying forward, tea and cups scattering everywhere. Elric quickly lunges forward to catch her, but ends up losing his balance, falling directly on top of Tyria on the sofa. Marie lands hard on her back, groaning in pain while Aldio stands behind her, looking at the tangled couple with a highly amused expression. Elric is blushing furiously, holding his hands up in a panic as he loudly screams that this is absolutely not what it looks like. Marie bursts into tears, dramatically apologizing for interrupting the adult's private business and making the situation 10 times worse. The mischievous butler Aldio quickly grabs Marie by the collar, dragging her out of the room while promising they won't disturb the couple's intimate time anymore. Elric is left completely speechless, his face burning with embarrassment as he struggles to find a way to explain the highly awkward position. Tyria covers her face with her hands, blushing intensely as she curls up on the sofa. Aldio slowly shuts the door behind them, giving them a polite nod and telling them to take all the time they need. Elric screams the butler's name in pure frustration. Later that night, Elric's embarrassed screams can still be heard echoing from the windows of the Grand Portman mansion. The next morning, bright sunlight streams through the tall windows of the master bedroom, the peaceful chirping of birds filling the air. Rhonda stands near the door, a polite knowing smile on her face as she asks Elric if he happened to cough just now. Elric sits at his desk, his face slightly flushed as he grumbles a quick morning greeting to the head maid. Rhonda chuckles softly, teasing him by pointing out that he seems to be in remarkably better spirits than usual this morning. She leans in close, whispering with a highly mischievous grin about whether they can expect some news of an Elric Jr. anytime soon. Elric nearly chokes on his own breath, his face turning a bright crimson as he panics. He frantically yells that absolutely nothing of the sort happened, while Rhonda merely giggles and calls it a massive pity. Rhonda's playful demeanor quickly turns serious as she looks at the young master, her expression softening. She gently reminds him that he left Tyria entirely on her own for 10 long years, and that 10 years passes very differently for a young girl than it does for a boy. We cut to Tyria's spacious bedroom, where she is quietly resting on her large canopy bed. She clutches a pillow tightly, a soft, peaceful expression on her face as she rests after the emotional whirlwind of the previous day. She gazes at the small framed portrait of young Elric sitting on her nightstand, a soft smile touching her lips. She gently touches the glass of the frame, whispering the words "my master" to herself. She thinks to herself about how incredibly happy she is, feeling as though the vast distance between them has finally closed just a little bit. She stretches her arms happily in her nightgown, wondering if she should start greeting her beloved husband every single morning from now on. It is a beautiful, bright morning shining down over the harvested fields of Wibben, but the vibe inside is anything but sunny. Inside the grand dining hall, Elric and Tyria are sitting on opposite ends of this massive table, and the silence between them is absolutely deafening. The only sound in the entire room is the awkward clinking of their forks and knives as they quietly eat their breakfast. Tyria delicately chews her food, looking completely calm on the outside but secretly struggling to handle the heavy atmosphere. Meanwhile, Elric is sweating bullets, chewing nervously while his brain goes into total panic mode over how unbearably awkward things have become. Naturally, he is still deeply embarrassed by their passionate kiss during the harvest festival last night, completely unable to even meet her gaze. Tyria finally breaks the ice, softly calling out to him across the long table. Elric nearly chokes on his food, sputtering out a nervous reply and telling her to go right ahead. Blushing slightly, Tyria asks if he happens to be free today and if he would be willing to go out with her for a while. Elric blinks in surprise, completely caught off guard by her sudden invitation. She quickly waves her hands defensively, explaining that they merely need to inspect the estate before the festival, and thought it was fitting since he finally returned. Elric smiles warmly, nodding in agreement as he realizes it really is their duty to prepare the estate for the upcoming celebration. He readily accepts her offer, and his warm smile instantly melts away all that awkward tension between them. Tyria looks absolutely thrilled, a happy blush spreading across her cheeks as they finish their breakfast. Later that morning, the maids gather in the hallway to put the finishing touches on Tyria's outfit. They help her into a gorgeous form-fitting blue gown, making sure every single detail looks pristine for her big outing. Rhonda leaves Marie to handle the madam while she personally heads off to check on the young master's outfit. She opens the door with a bright smile, fully expecting to see a proper noble lord, but Elric quickly tells her he is already dressed. Rhonda's smile instantly vanishes. She glares at him with a terrifyingly stern face, demanding to know what exactly he thinks he is wearing. Elric is standing there dressed in a ridiculous vagabond outfit, complete with a wide-brimmed pirate hat, arguing that it's the most practical gear for a long day outside. Rhonda drags him backward by his collar, scolding him for dressing like a common bandit and reminding him they are inspecting an estate, not marching off to war. She drags him right back into the dressing room as Elric desperately begs her to reconsider his super practical clothes. He insists he is perfectly capable of dressing himself, but Rhonda absolutely refuses to let him leave looking like a total vagrant. She reaches out aggressively, completely ignoring his protests as she prepares to rework his entire outfit from scratch. She proudly declares that a nobleman must always dress in a way that reflects his high station, leaving Elric sweating in panic. She starts aggressively ripping off his dull clothes and accessories, tossing his bandit gear straight to the floor. Elric laughs nervously, desperately trying to get her to step out so he can at least change his clothes on his own. Rhonda merely giggles, teasingly reminding him that when he was a little boy, he used to run around naked without a single care in the world. She grabs his collar firmly, telling him to stop whining and cooperate with his makeover. With one swift motion, she tears his shirt completely open, leaving the young master utterly exposed. But the moment Rhonda looks at his chest, her playful smile instantly vanishes, replaced by a look of sheer horror. With his shirt ripped open, Elric's muscular torso is revealed to be completely covered in a terrifying web of deep, brutal battle scars. Rhonda trembles in absolute shock, her hand covering her mouth as she quietly asks what on earth happened to him. Elric looks away awkwardly, clutching his open shirt and muttering that this is exactly why he wanted to dress himself. Rhonda walks up to him with tears welling in her eyes, deeply grieved by the brutal reality of what her beloved young master had to endure. She gently reaches out and places her gloved hand against his cheek, looking at him with deep maternal sorrow. Elric offers a weak, embarrassed smile, desperately begging her not to breathe a single word of this to Tyria. Rhonda lets out a soft sob, her heart breaking for him as she quietly nods in agreement. Adjusting her glasses, she promises that she will keep his secret, but declares that from now on she will be the only one allowed to help him dress. Outside, the loyal butler Aldio stands waiting by the grand carriage, checking his pocket watch. Elric finally steps out, looking incredibly sharp and handsome in a pristine, high-collared noble suit. Aldio chuckles, admitting he half expected him to show up looking like a wild bandit, but is relieved to see his worries were unfounded. Elric laughs, pointing out that it nearly happened, but Rhonda stepped in and rescued him just in time. Tyria's soft voice suddenly calls out from behind, politely apologizing for keeping them waiting. Tyria steps into the sunlight, looking absolutely stunning in her elegant gown as she shyly asks how she looks. Elric's face turns bright red, and he stands there completely spellbound, managing to stutter out that she looks incredibly beautiful. Rhonda sighs happily in the background, keeping her mouth shut as she watches the adorable couple share a genuine happy moment together. Elric holds open the carriage door for his wife, warmly asking if they should head off, and Tyria happily agrees. As the carriage pulls into the lively market district, a merchant spots them and loudly shouts to his friend to look who just arrived. Whispers instantly spread like wildfire through the crowd, everyone asking if the runaway brat really came back. Despite the gossiping crowd, many townspeople warmly wave and welcome him back. Elric smiles, politely wishing that everyone has been doing well. A local market woman, Auntie Michelle, gasps in absolute shock as she walks up to the carriage. Elric laughs warmly, greeting her and asking how she has been. She clutches her cheeks, crying out in delight that the tiny little boy she remembered has grown into such an incredibly fine young man. They continue their walk toward the general store district, where a group of old childhood friends spot him near the signpost. A man with long purple hair and a ponytail smiles broadly, nudging his friend to look at who decided to return. They laugh heartily, asking him if he really came back to stay for good this time. Another friend notices his cane and asks what happened to his leg. Elric casually brushes it off, telling them he just hurt it a little bit and that it is nothing major. Suddenly, a loud, energetic voice screams from behind, asking if Boss Elric really came back. Elric turns his head to spot a young blonde man with freckles running toward him, his eyes wide with pure excitement. Before Elric can even react, the young man grabs his hand in a firm, passionate handshake. The boy, Bart, throws his arms around Elric in a massive emotional hug, crying tears of joy. Elric chuckles, noting that Bart hasn't changed a single bit. Bart pulls back and politely greets Tyria, wishing her well. Tyria smiles gently, returning his warm greeting. Bart points down the street, excitedly telling Elric to swing by their tavern after the Harvest Festival so they can share a proper drink. Elric happily promises that he will definitely do that. Waving goodbye with a bright smile, Elric tells Bart that he will see him later. The couple continues their stroll through the bustling festival streets, the warm sunlight casting a peaceful glow over them. Bart watches them walk away, a proud smile on his face as he mutters that he never imagined those two would actually end up married, but seeing them now, they truly suit each other perfectly. As evening falls, the carriage travels peacefully through the vast golden wheat fields under a stunning crimson sunset. Inside the carriage, Tyria sits quietly, engrossed in reading a large book while Elric watches her from across the seat. He peeks at the cover, noting that she is reading a thick botanical encyclopedia. Deciding to break the silence, Elric calls her name softly. She looks up from her book, her gentle green eyes meeting his as she responds. Elric blushes slightly, rubbing the back of his neck as he prepares to make a major decision. He explains that she has had to shoulder everything entirely on her own for the last 10 years, and that even if it's late, he wants to take full responsibility as the head of the household. He asks her if she would guide him so he can be of some real use. Tyria is left speechless, her eyes wide with surprise. She covers her blushing face with her hand, her heart warming as she realizes how incredibly reliable her husband has become. She lowers her hand, a mischievous but warm smile appearing on her face as she asks if she can be strict with him. She warns him that she will train him just as strictly as his late father trained her, making Elric sweat drop in sudden nervousness. Elric lets out a soft chuckle, placing a hand over his heart as he accepts her challenge with a warm smile. As the carriage travels along the road, Elric curiously asks if his father was really that strict of a teacher. Tyria admits that he was, though he never once raised his voice. Meanwhile, we cut to a grand 3-story tavern located near the Chevor border under a bright, glowing full moon. The night is quiet and peaceful, the massive moon hanging high in the starry sky. Inside, the tavern is lively and crowded, filled with patrons drinking and sharing stories of the recent wars. Suddenly, the front doors swing open, and a pair of dark boots steps inside, instantly drawing the attention of those nearby. The bartender stops what he is doing, his eyes widening in surprise as he looks toward the entrance. Standing in the doorway is a young woman with long, vibrant red hair and a dark traveling cloak, her hands resting on her hips. She looks around the room with cold, dangerous eyes, declaring with a chilling voice that she will only ask this once. Where is Kasha, the sword demon? As the golden evening sun bathes the Portman estate, Elric sits in his private study watching Tyria work diligently on household accounts. The gentle scratching of her quill pen fills the quiet room, a steady rhythm of dedication and focus. She writes tirelessly, managing the complex finances of their vast estate entirely on her own. Elric watches her with deep respect, asking if she truly has to process this massive mountain of paperwork completely by herself. Tyria replies that it is only like this during the busy harvest seasons. She pauses, her gentle gaze meeting his as she softly addresses him. Elric warmly encourages her to go ahead and speak her mind. She asks him if he would be willing to deliver a formal official speech to mark his return as the rightful Lord of Portman for this year's harvest celebration. Elric is caught off guard, a nervous smile appearing on his face as he stutters out a repetition of her request. The concept of giving an inspiring, noble speech deeply unsettles him, triggering dark memories from his past. He flashes back to the bloody battlefield, where commanders gave grand, rousing speeches to rally their soldiers before sending them to their deaths. Back when he lived as the ruthless mercenary Kasha, he never once listened to those empty, manipulative words. He was never the type of man to stand proudly on a stage, nor did he ever have any intention of doing so. The cold, hard eyes of his younger mercenary self stare out from the blood-splattered visor of his helmet. He desperately needed a violent and dangerous place to unleash his directionless rage and self-loathing. He lived as a weapon, his blade slicing through enemy ranks in a mindless frenzy of blood and violence. He slashed his opponents with ruthless efficiency, caring absolutely nothing for the political causes he fought for. Like a mad dog, he brutally cut down anyone who happened to stand before him, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. He left his enemies sprawled on the cold ground, completely dead to the concepts of nobility or honor. He questions how a deeply scarred, violent monster like himself could ever be expected to stand before a crowd and deliver an inspiring speech. Tyria's soft voice breaks his dark train of thought, calling out to him. Elric quickly snaps out of his flashback, stammering out a nervous apology. He gives her a warm, reassuring smile and offers a compromise, suggesting that he stands right beside her on the stage while she delivers the speech. Tyria looks at him with a soft, affectionate smile, happily agreeing to his suggestion. She adds with a gentle look that there is always next year's harvest festival for him to prepare his own address, showing her immense patience. The big day of the harvest festival finally arrives, the village square absolutely packed with cheering crowds and colorful decorations. Standing proudly on the stage, Tyria delivers an inspiring speech, thanking the hard-working townspeople for their dedication and inviting them to enjoy the festivities. The crowd erupts into massive, joyous cheers, their voices filling the bright blue sky. With the formal part of the day over, Tyria turns to Elric with a warm smile, asking if they should join the festivities as well. The townspeople gasp in excitement as they spot the Lord and Lady of Portman walking down the steps to join them in the streets. A merchant quickly runs up, offering Tyria a plate of fresh, delicious food and begging her to try some of their harvest. Another villager hands Elric a massive mug of freshly brewed ale, loudly welcoming him back and urging him to have a drink. Elric smiles warmly, accepting the drink and raising his mug as he thanks everyone and wishes them a wonderful harvest festival. Suddenly, Tyria lets out a quiet gasp of excitement, her eyes wide as she spots something interesting in the crowd. She eagerly points toward a wooden stage nearby, calling out for Elric to look over there. A flamboyant royal jester in a green suit dances on the stage, calling out to the ladies and gentlemen of Wibben to watch a rare, exciting performance. He proudly announces his next act is sword swallowing. Elric watches the performer with a highly amused and slightly skeptical expression. The performer dramatically grips the hilt of a large steel sword, preparing to slide it down his throat. The crowd bursts into loud applause as the performer successfully pulls off the dangerous stunt, leaving everyone in absolute awe. Tyria claps happily, but notices that Elric is looking completely unfazed and asks him if he isn't impressed by the show at all. Elric sweat drops, offering a nervous smile. Naturally, he doesn't mention the grim reality of how those men actually ended up swallowing swords on the real battlefield. They continue their stroll through the festival, stopping near a popular knife-throwing booth. The merchant at the booth can clearly see who they are and loudly challenges Elric to show off his skills with a round of knife throwing. The local kids gather around in excitement, cheering and whispering that the Lord of Portman is actually going to throw knives. The merchant places 3 ripe red apples on a wooden stand, promising a great prize if Elric can hit the targets from a distance. Tyria smiles warmly, taking Elric's hand and gently encouraging him to join in for some fun, since even the children are watching. Elric hesitates but agrees to throw a few just for show. He slowly walks up to the throwing line, weighing the heavy daggers in his hand as the crowd cheers him on. The merchant laughs, telling him there is absolutely no need to be tense and that he only needs to land 2 of his 3 shots to win. With a swift and fluid motion, Elric flicks his wrist, throwing all 3 daggers simultaneously. The 3 knives hit the exact center of all 3 apples in a perfect split second. The merchant stands completely frozen in absolute shock, his jaw dropping to the floor. The surrounding crowd erupts into wild cheers, the kids jumping around in sheer amazement. Tyria stares at him with starry eyes, her face flushed with pure awe and excitement. Elric sweat drops, realizing he let his battle-hardened instincts take over, and thinking to himself that he probably should have pretended to miss. He offers a nervous laugh, claiming it was nothing but pure lucky shots, so he doesn't raise any suspicion about his mercenary past. The merchant quickly recovers his senses, loudly declaring that the young master's performance was absolutely incredible. Tyria claps her hands happily, her cheeks flushed as she praises him, saying it was like watching a legendary knight in action. Elric blushes, muttering that she is exaggerating. The merchant proudly hands over the winner's prize, presenting them with a beautifully wrapped bundle of fresh, high-quality eggs. He insists that this is the Merchant Guild's official prize, looking highly honored to hand it over. Elric politely declines the reward, suggesting that they give the bundle of eggs to the local children instead. The kids cheer in delight, yelling that their lord is the absolute best. Tyria looks at him with a warm, deeply affectionate smile, noting how incredibly kind he is. Elric reminisces with a soft smile, admitting that he was simply thinking back to their childhood, remembering how thrilled he was whenever he won a prize bundle with a golden egg inside. Tyria giggles, recalling how he immediately traded that rare golden egg for a giant knight's helmet that looked like a bucket on his tiny head. Elric stops in surprise, asking in bewilderment how she could possibly know about such a private childhood memory. Realizing her slip-up, Tyria blushes furiously and stammers out a flustered explanation, claiming he was simply a legendary troublemaker whose stories were told everywhere. She quickly turns her face away, hiding her burning blush as she thinks to herself that she can absolutely never tell him the truth. She remembers how she secretly watched him play fight in that bucket helmet all those years ago, dreaming of the day she would finally become his bride. Elric gently calls her back to reality, pointing toward the town square. He explains that the festive after-party is about to begin, and warmly offers his hand to guide her to the plaza. Tyria smiles happily, placing her delicate hand in his as they walk together under the beautiful evening sky. Night falls over Wibben, the sky transforming into a deep, starry blue as the celebration continues. The town crier stands on a raised platform, announcing to the gathered crowd that the after-party lantern lighting ceremony is officially open. He loudly calls for the crowd to offer a massive round of applause to thank their beautiful lord and lady for honoring the festival with their presence. The crowd laughs and cheers, teasing that the town crier sure knows how to lay the compliments on thick. The crier calls for everyone to raise their lanterns and pray for Wibben's enduring glory and future prosperity. And to properly bless this special night, he loudly announces a traditional kiss ceremony between Lord Elric and Lady Tyria. Elric and Tyria both freeze in absolute shock, their faces instantly turning a bright, burning crimson as the crowd erupts into wild cheers. They stare at each other in pure flustered panic, completely trapped by the playful demands of the villagers. At the town plaza under the dark night sky, the harvest after-party lighting ceremony is officially underway. The town crier raises his hands high, leading the festive crowd in a loud prayer for Wibben's lasting glory and prosperity. The crier then dramatically raises his voice, announcing that to bless this beautiful night, they will have a traditional kiss ceremony between Lord Elric and Lady Tyria. Elric and Tyria are caught completely off guard, their faces instantly turning a bright, burning crimson as they look at each other in sheer panic. They stand frozen on the decorated stage, completely flustered under the intense, playful gaze of the entire town. Bart laughs loudly from the crowd, shouting for the Lord to stop standing around and just kiss his beautiful wife already. The town crier jovially joins in, telling the villagers to cheer even louder so their young lord can finally muster up some courage. The crowd immediately starts chanting for a kiss in unison, putting immense pressure on the embarrassed couple. Realizing there is no escape, Elric takes a deep breath, stepping closer to Tyria and softly asking for her permission just for a brief moment. He gently dips her down, wrapping his arm around her waist as he leans in to meet her. He kisses her gently, their faces closing together as Tyria's eyes widen in absolute surprise and her heart skips a beat. Pulling back with a blush, Elric whispers a quick apology, explaining that he only did it because the crowd would have never let them leave the stage otherwise. But Tyria merely smiles softly, whispering back that since it is a festival, they should at least meet the town's expectations this much. She looks up at him with deep affection, stating that she fully understands. With a bold and loving motion, Tyria pulls him down, kissing him passionately on the lips. Elric is completely stunned. The crowd goes absolutely wild, screaming and cheering at the incredibly romantic display. Confetti and fireworks burst into the starry night sky, the crier shouting blessings for their love to last forever. Later that night, the Grand Portman mansion stands quiet and peaceful under the bright moonlight. Inside her bedroom, Tyria sits on her bed, completely flustered and screaming internally about her bold action. She buries her face in her hands, her cheeks burning bright red as she tries to hide her embarrassment. She panics, wondering what in the world possessed her to kiss him so boldly in front of the entire town. She rolls around in bed, her mind racing with worry that Elric will think she is some brazen forward woman. That night, after the incredible harvest festival ended, Tyria tossed and turned in her bed, completely unable to sleep. Naturally, Elric is also wide awake in his room, staring blankly at the ceiling as he repeatedly touches his lips in disbelief. Meanwhile, we cut to a grand modern building flying a golden banner with the initials EW in the Arwen Kingdom. Inside the luxurious estate, a sophisticated man in a beige suit elegantly lifts a cup of tea to his lips. He takes a quiet sip of his tea, looking highly relaxed and powerful. In the spacious office, a woman with long silver hair stands before his desk, presenting a report to Chairman White. A masked guard stands next to the desk of Gold Duke Edward White, who smiles coldly behind his round glasses, praising their masterstroke in targeting Kasha. Standing beside the Duke is his beautiful white-haired secretary, Agnes Blackmire, looking calm and serious. Agnes notes that Falben and Chivor hold substantial shares in the EW group, and questions if it is truly acceptable to let them fall so easily to the Imperial Army. Edward White smiles coldly, explaining that the Emperor's western conquest has already entered its 7th year, and kingdoms like Falben and Chivor would have collapsed long ago without Kasha. He adds that those kingdoms drawing war funds from Armen through their stakes in the EW group have long lost any real capacity to repay what they owe. He takes another sip of his tea, calmly stating that now that the legendary Kasha is gone, it is only a matter of time before Falben and Chivor fall as well. Before that happens, Edward intends to extract the key figures and reclaim their assets to ensure maximum profit. He reaches down, his hand resting on the golden tea set as he discusses his plans with absolute indifference. Agnes pours him more tea, commenting on how incredibly cold and calculating his business strategies always are. Edward smiles, noting that those born noble are bound by responsibility and duty, and must set a proper example for others. Edward points out that as a noble of Armen, he is simply doing his duty to protect their family interests. Agnes looks at him, asking if he is absolutely certain it is safe to leave Kasha alone. She mentions that there is a real possibility Kasha will seek revenge if he recovers from his injuries. A flashback shows Kasha unleashing a powerful mana shield to block a bullet at the speed of sound, a feat that should have completely destroyed his knee. Edward White dismisses her worries, calmly stating that killing Kasha outright would have been a waste of a highly useful tool. He explains that Kasha, or rather Elric Portman, is a mercenary through and through, yet he possesses one crucial difference. He points out that unlike typical mercenaries, Elric doesn't move simply according to personal profit. Therefore, Edward decided that as long as Elric remains in Wibben, his movements can be easily monitored and controlled. He adds that now that Kasha has withdrawn from the front lines, the war will stagnate, forcing other kingdoms to beg the EW group for war funds. He confidently claims that Kasha's very existence will act as the weight that tips the entire conflict in their favor, accumulating greater wealth for their group. His eyes gleam behind his glasses, a greedy and satisfied grin appearing on his face. Edward boasts that Agnes's analysis is spot on, praising her brilliance as the quality he adores most about her. He steps forward and dramatically reaches out to hug her in excitement. But Agnes swiftly dodges his advance, her cold and serious expression completely unchanged. She sternly warns him to keep his distance, stating that she won't hesitate to punish him despite his high noble status. Back at the Portman estate, the bright morning sun shines over the grand manor. Rhonda helps Elric adjust his suit before the mirror, asking him if it's too tight or bothers him anywhere. Elric smiles and assures her that he is doing completely fine. As they prepare to leave, Tyria enters the room, looking absolutely stunning in her formal autumn dress. Elric looks at her, momentarily losing his breath as he softly calls out to her. Tyria is equally flustered, her cheeks turning a bright pink as she stutters out a greeting. Rhonda giggles softly behind her hand, highly amused by the adorable blushing couple. She steps back, letting them walk side by side as they head out of the dressing room. As they walk down the corridor, Rhonda notices Elric's nervous behavior and teasingly asks if they had an argument. She mentions she heard things got quite heated during the festival yesterday and was rather pleased to hear it. Elric panics, blushing furiously as he waves his hands and insists that it was only because Bart stirred everyone up and that they had no choice. He quickly changes the subject, asking who exactly is arriving at the estate today. Rhonda smiles, informing him that a trade delegation from the Western Kingdoms is currently on its way. Elric's expression instantly hardens as he asks in a serious voice if they really are from the Western Kingdoms. Rhonda happily adds that this year even the powerful Armen Kingdom has joined the bidding for Wibbin's wheat. Elric's heart sinks. He realizes that if anyone from the Western Kingdoms recognizes his face, his quiet life will be instantly shattered, throwing the entire fief into chaos. Rhonda notes that under normal circumstances Tyria would have gone in his place, but since he has returned as Lord, it is only right that he receives them. Elric reluctantly agrees. Later, Elric and Uldio stand together inside the grand glass-domed train station, waiting for the delegates to arrive. Elric takes a deep, steadying breath, telling himself to calm down. He reasons that no one who saw him on the brutal front lines would travel all this way just to trade wheat. He adjusts his gloves, trying to mentally prepare himself for the meeting. The steam train slowly pulls into the station, the loud screech of the brakes and clouds of white smoke filling the air. The doors of the train carriage open, and the delegates begin to step down onto the platform. Elric and Aldio step forward, Elric offering a polite bow as he welcomes the honored delegates to Wibbin on behalf of the Portman family. But as the lead delegate looks up, his eyes lock onto Elric's face, and he freezes in absolute shock. The delegate's face turns completely pale, sweat pouring down his forehead in sheer terror. Elric's red eyes narrow as he notices the man's extreme reaction, a tense silence settling over the platform. The delegate stumbles back in absolute horror, his voice trembling violently as he stammers out a question. He stares in complete terror, instantly recognizing the legendary and merciless sword demon, Kasha, standing right in front of him. Over in the Armen Kingdom, the grand headquarters of the EW group stands towering under a clear sky. A flustered shout echoes from inside, asking who was reported to have arrived in Wibbin. Chairman White runs frantically down the corridor, his silver-haired secretary Agnes calmly walking right behind him. He grumbles about his sister not saying a single word about her sudden arrival. He bursts through the double doors of his private office with a loud slam, his face filled with dramatic panic. As soon as he spots her, he opens his arms wide and shouts out in absolute delight for his sister Egret. Standing before him is his sister, the legendary warrior Egret Valentina, also known as the Blazing Flower. She stares at his childish behavior with a deadpan, unimpressed expression. She glares coldly at him, her sharp gaze warning him to stop his dramatic display immediately. Edward completely ignores her warning, sweeping her up in a tight, dramatic hug while crying that she has grown even taller since the last time they met. Egret's face immediately turns menacing as she threatens to reduce him to actual ashes if he doesn't put her down this instant. Edward's playful grin instantly vanishes, his eyes swirling with comical fear as he nervously agrees. Once they settle down, Egret crosses her arms and demands to know if they have finally located the exact whereabouts of Kasha. Edward nervously scratches his cheek, admitting that the legendary sword demon has been proving extremely difficult to track as he disappears like an absolute ghost. He whimpers as Egret grabs his cheeks, pinching them aggressively in sheer frustration at his failure. She tells him that if he is that desperate to secure their family interests, he needs to hunt Kasha down and bring him before her. With a swift turn, Egret flings her dark cloak back, her majestic warrior presence commanding the entire room. She glares over her shoulder, stating that she won't give him much time to complete the task. She demands that at the absolute minimum he uncovers Kasha's current whereabouts so they can monitor him. Edward nervously nods, agreeing to his sister's strict terms. Egret walks out of the room, her footsteps clicking sharply against the marble floor. After she leaves, Agnes approaches the sweating Duke, asking him if he is really thinking of handing over Kasha's secret location to his sister. Edward adjusts his glasses with a dark, plotting grin, stating that if those two monsters ever crossed paths, only the gods know what kind of horrific catastrophe would follow. He asks if the trade delegation has finally departed for Wiven, to which Agnes confirms. He remains confident that his plan is flawless, reasoning that Elric, the new Lord of Portman, won't be able to ignore the incredible offer they have placed on the table. His eyes narrow as he smiles to himself, having prepared an offer so tempting that Elric cannot possibly turn it down. Meanwhile, back in Wiven, the steam train speeds through the sunset-drenched wheat fields, carrying the Western delegates to their destination. Inside the carriage, the delegates sit in tense silence, looking highly nervous about their upcoming meeting. They sit across from each other, their faces filled with anxiety as they prepare to negotiate. They arrive at Wiven, stepping down from the train onto the polished platform of the station. They form a line, adjusting their formal coats and trying to present themselves as dignified noblemen. The train station is spacious and busy, the grand dome reflecting the warm orange light of the sunset. A delegate steps forward, his heavy leather coat rustling as he looks around. Elric and Aldio stand waiting to receive them, Elric offering a polite bow as he welcomes the honored envoys on behalf of the Portman family. He adds that the carriages are fully prepared to escort them straight to the Portman estate, his voice calm and welcoming. But the moment the lead delegate looks up and spots Elric's face, he gasps in pure, unadulterated terror. Elric's red eyes narrow as he notices the man's extreme reaction, a cold silence settling over the platform. The delegate stumbles back in absolute horror, his voice trembling violently as he stammers out a question. The other delegates watch in complete bewilderment as their leader has a full-on mental breakdown right there in public, shaking his head in panic. Elric quickly realizes the danger, knowing that if his true identity is revealed, both Wiven and Tyria will be in serious danger. He warns himself to hide his identity no matter what it takes. The terrified delegate, Lord Polo, stammers in panic, demanding to turn the train around immediately. Elric quickly steps forward, putting out a highly convincing jovial noble act as he proudly declares his identity as Elric Portman, head of the Portman family. Polo is left completely stunned, staring at the cheerful, smiling man in front of him and wondering if his eyes are playing tricks on him. Elric smiles broadly, asking Polo if his face has gone completely white because he is feeling unwell from the long journey. His convincing act slowly begins to calm the panicking delegates. But Polo's mind continues to race as he flashes back to the terrifying monster he saw on the battlefield 5 years ago. He remembers the legendary sword demon Kasha turning a formal noble gathering into an absolute bloodbath. The crowd of nobles had stood in pure horror as Kasha stood victoriously amidst the chaos. Whispers of fear had rippled through the grand hall as they witnessed his terrifying, monstrous strength. Polo had watched in sheer panic as a noble commander screamed at Elric, calling him a low-born cur of unknown bloodline. The commander had demanded to know if Elric had any idea who he was insulting and what powerful family stood behind him. But Kasha had simply cut him off with a swift, brutal strike, showing absolutely zero respect for his noble status. Elric had stood calmly, challenges echoing around him as he prepared to face anyone else who dared stand in his path. He had declared that he was more than willing to settle this affront to their honor with a duel, his red eyes glowing with deadly intent. The arrogant nobles had quickly shut their mouths, completely broken by his overwhelming, terrifying aura. The commander had yelled in a panic, calling Elric an arrogant whelp and promising to teach him a lesson in etiquette. He had screamed at his guards to bring him 2 swords, desperate to salvage his shattered pride. But a voice had suddenly echoed through the hall, ordering them to stay their hand. Elric had slowly turned his head to see who dared interfere in his business. It was the silver-haired knight Elvis Graham, rolling forward in his wheelchair to defuse the situation. Elvis had politely asked Polo to overlook the offense with noble grace, claiming it was far too late for a petty duel. And yet, that same terrifying monster is now standing right in front of him, dressed as a polite, refined young master. Polo takes a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart as he tells himself that he must have simply overreacted and mistaken Elric for Kasha. He is sure that a wretched, blood-soaked monster like Kasha could never possibly exist in a peaceful backcountry like this. He glances at Elric from the side, still unable to shake the unsettling, familiar feeling radiating from the young lord. The carriage travels swiftly down the sun-drenched road, carrying the delegates toward the Portman estate. Tyria and her maids stand waiting at the entrance, Tyria offering a warm, welcoming smile as she welcomes them to Wiven. She stands gracefully in her elegant gown, radiating a beautiful and welcoming presence. She notes that they have come a very great distance and suggests that they rest and recover from their long journey first. She instructs Rhonda to show their honored guests straight to their private rooms so they can relax. Later that evening, the stars shine brightly over the peaceful, quiet estate. Inside his room, Lord Polo sits comfortably in a plush armchair, relaxing after the long and stressful day. Suddenly, a polite knock on the door cuts through the quiet room. He mutters to himself, wondering who could possibly be bothering him at this late hour. He opens the door and grumbles, stating that he has absolutely no need for room service and wishes to be left undisturbed. But as he looks up, his breath catches in his throat. Standing in the doorway is Elric, looking calm and incredibly serious. Polo stumbles back in a panic, his face twisting with terror as he grips his desk for support. Inside Lord Polo's private guest chambers, the atmosphere turns ice cold as Elric stands before him. Polo falls backward onto the floor, trembling violently as he stammers out his fear. Elric stands completely silent, looking down on him with a chilling, empty expression that only a seasoned killer would possess. Polo desperately crawls backward, begging to know why Elric is doing this to him. Polo is left shivering on his knees, desperately bringing up a past incident and pleading that he already apologized for his behavior back then. Elric quietly asks if he means that day. He calmly sits down in a plush armchair, resting his hands on his cane as he glares at the trembling noble. He coldly asks if Polo is referring to the day he publicly slandered both him and his family. With a menacing look in his red eyes, Elric quietly adds a terrifying detail, stating that he doesn't recall ever accepting that apology. As Polo continues to sweat in absolute terror, Elric casually asks him if he plans to stay groveling on the cold floor forever. He calmly invites him to sit down so they can discuss proper business. Polo slowly pulls himself up, completely bewildered. Elric leans forward, his voice low as he points out that Polo didn't travel all this way just to trade for Wibbin's wheat. They sit across from each other in the silent parlor, the air thick with tension. Polo nervously swallows his saliva, while Elric begins to explain the real reason behind Wibbin's sudden economic prosperity. He mentions that before Polo arrived, Wibbin had already established a powerful trade alliance with Lord Ugal. Elric explains that Lord Ugal had presented a highly lucrative business proposal to the Portman family. He asks Polo if he can guess the terms of that agreement. Polo waits anxiously for him to continue, completely at the mercy of the legendary sword demon. Elric reveals that the Armen Kingdom intends to buy up Wibbin's entire wheat harvest and distribute it throughout the Western territories. In return, a portion of the massive commissions earned would be paid directly to the Portman family. But the agreement came with one strict, unyielding condition. Wibbin must sell its wheat exclusively to Armen. He looks at Polo, stating that he trusts he will make a highly sound decision regarding this exclusive partnership. He offers a cold, confident smile, completely dominating the negotiation. Polo slams his hands on the table, shouting in absolute rage at the realization that they are trying to monopolize the entire crop. He curses the Armen group, realizing they have been quietly plotting this massive deal behind everyone's backs. Desperate to salvage the situation, Polo asks if Elric would be willing to strike a secret deal with him instead. He looks at Elric pleadingly, arguing that as the Empire's official supply officer, he has the authority to make a highly lucrative offer. Elric remains completely silent, his calm demeanor making Polo sweat in nervous anticipation. Polo desperately adds that if Elric agrees, they can put their past bad blood completely behind them and build a highly profitable future. Elric continues to watch him with a calculating look, refusing to show a single hint of his true thoughts. He asks what percentage of Armen's original offer Polo is willing to match. Polo quickly offers 60%, claiming that cutting the price any further would create massive, endless problems on his side of the border. Elric merely raises an eyebrow, staying completely silent as he lets the pressure build. Polo instantly panics, quickly raising his offer to 70% and promising that the Empire will also shoulder all transport and tariff costs. Elric pauses, before calmly countering with a final demand of 75%. He looks Polo dead in the eye and asks if they finally have a solid binding agreement. Polo sighs in relief, commenting on what an incredibly tough and ruthless negotiator Elric has become. He curiously asks why Elric chose to do business with him of all people, given their bitter history. Elric looks away, a cold, focused expression on his face as he hides his true, complex thoughts. The reality is that Elric wanted to keep Polo close to ensure his own safety and monitor the Empire's movements. Polo smiles warmly, telling Elric to simply say the word whenever he needs anything from the Empire. But Elric's smile fades as he delivers a chilling warning, stating that if so much as a single whisper about Kasha being in Wibbin spreads, their contract will be rewritten in blood. Polo's breath catches in his throat as he looks into Elric's glowing red eyes, realizing the terrifying weight of his threat. He swallows hard, fully understanding that any betrayal will result in his immediate demise. With that final warning, Elric stands up and prepares to leave the guest chambers. He tells Polo to take all the time he needs to prepare his departure. He exits the room, the heavy double doors closing quietly behind him. Elric limps down the hallway, a look of immense exhaustion and guilt washing over his face. He tightly clutches his cane, realizing how much he has had to rely on his old violent habits to protect his new life. He hates himself for acting so much like his cold-hearted father, but knows he has no other choice. He must carry this heavy burden of responsibility and duty, no matter how much it tears him apart inside. Meanwhile, we cut to Tyria standing elegantly in her dark red gown near the front entrance of the mansion. She looks absolutely stunning, her warm presence instantly cutting through Elric's dark thoughts as he approaches her. She asks him if his meeting with the delegates went well, her eyes filled with gentle concern. Elric smiles warmly, assuring her that everything is completely taken care of and that they have secured a highly profitable trade agreement. He looks at her with deep affection, his heart swelling with a quiet, peaceful happiness. He is deeply grateful for her presence in his life, realizing she is the only light in his dark, scarred world. He instructs the servants to escort their guests safely back to the train station. As the carriages pull away, Polo waves a polite farewell from his window, looking highly relieved to be leaving in one piece. Elric watches them depart, a calm, steady expression on his face as the dust settles on the road. The carriage speeds away through the golden wheat fields under a beautiful clear sky. Elric looks at Tyria and admits that he is seeing her in a completely different light now, highly impressed by her fierce strength and pride. He confesses that he had no idea she possessed such incredible steel and determination. Tyria smiles softly and blushes, quietly replying that she merely stated the simple facts to protect their family's honor. She adds with a playful look that he himself seemed far sharper and more reliable than she expected. Tyria proudly holds up the signed trade agreement, her face radiant with happiness. Elric laughs warmly, his heart full as they share a light-hearted happy moment together. He asks if they should head back inside the warmth of the mansion, and Tyria happily agrees. Meanwhile, back at the Grand EW Group headquarters in the Armon Kingdom, a loud crash echoes from the main office. Chairman White slams through the double doors, throwing a massive tantrum and running wildly around the room. He screams in absolute frustration while his secretary Agnes watches him with a deadpan, unimpressed look. He collapses onto the floor, kicking his legs and throwing papers everywhere like a spoiled child. He stomps his feet, screaming that his perfect plans have been completely shattered by some backwater merchant's son. He jumps into the air in a comical fit of rage, looking completely ridiculous as he throws a tantrum. Agnes calmly reaches out and grabs him mid-air, holding him firmly in a tight embrace to stop his wild flailing. Edward collapses into her arms, sobbing dramatically about how cruel and unfair the world is. Agnes holds him tightly, her expression neutral but patient as she comforts her dramatic boss. She pats his back gently, letting him vent all of his comical frustration. With a stern but calm voice, she tells him to get a hold of himself and stop acting like a child. She elegantly pours a cup of hot tea, hoping it will help cool his head a little bit. Edward sits back, looking slightly embarrassed as he accepts the tea and murmurs a quiet apology. Agnes asks him if his head has cooled down enough for them to discuss their next strategic move. Edward sighs, admitting that Elric's negotiation skills completely overturned all of his expectations, making him wonder what exactly is going through that man's mind. Agnes calmly suggests that when you want to know what someone is truly thinking, sometimes the simplest way is to ask them directly. Edward ponders her words, realizing that they will have to get his answers straight from Elric's own mouth. He reaches out and opens a private velvet-lined drawer on his desk, his expression turning cold and serious. He pulls out a beautifully engraved golden revolver, his eyes gleaming behind his glasses as he whispers, "They will need a proper channel to converse with him." The scene shifts to the magnificent house of Elver Scram, a towering noble castle standing proudly under a bright sky. Inside the guest hall, the wheelchair-bound Elvis Graham extends a warm welcome to his guest. Lord Polo, still slightly pale from his journey, walks toward him. He quickly hands a sealed letter to Elvis, asking him to take a look at it before anything else. Elvis looks at the elegant golden seal on the envelope, his curiosity instantly piqued. Polo formally presents it, revealing that the letter is addressed to him from none other than Sir Elric Portman. Elvis is completely taken aback, muttering his name in surprise. He carefully opens the letter, his eyes scanning the elegant handwriting on the paper. As he reads the contents, a knowing and highly amused smile begins to spread across Elvis's face. Polo watches him in complete bewilderment as Elvis suddenly lets out a quiet snort of amusement. Before Polo can even ask what's so funny, Elvis bursts into a loud, hearty fit of laughter. Wiping a tear of amusement from his eye, Elvis comments on how incredibly shaken Polo must have been to suddenly find himself face to face with the legendary Kasha. Polo shudderingly admits he nearly fainted on the spot. Edward's sister Egret stands in the background as Elvis smiles warmly, expressing his immense gratitude to Polo for bringing this crucial letter to him personally. Knowing his task is complete, Polo bows politely and prepares to take his leave, wishing the young lord safe travels as he exits the guest hall. Left alone in the quiet study, Elvis gazes out the window, his expression turning deeply nostalgic. He whispers the name Kasha, reflecting on how his old companion vanished without a single word, only to turn up living a peaceful life in Wiven. Meanwhile, we cut to a snowy forest trail cut through the mountains, the ground completely covered in a thick blanket of white. A group of hunters is deep in the woods, the barrel of a large hunting rifle suddenly aiming through the branches. With a loud bang, the hunter fires a perfect shot, and the group cheers in excitement as the target falls. They jog toward their prey, marveling at the incredible size of the wild deer they managed to bring down. But as they begin to examine the carcass, a sudden bone-chilling sound echoes from the shadows of the forest. Suddenly, a massive, terrifying creature lunges from the bushes, its claws slicing through the air with immense speed. Derek is thrown to the ground, his chest heavily slashed as blood splatters across the pristine white snow. The remaining hunters scream in pure panic, firing their rifles blindly into the dark woods as they try to retreat. But their weapons are completely useless against the fast-moving beast, which quickly closes the distance and leaps toward them. Row after row of hunters are brutally cut down in a split second, their bloodied bodies collapsing onto the cold ground. He screams in absolute terror as the beast raises its massive claws, preparing to deliver the final fatal blow. Suddenly, a powerful blast of wind rips through the clearing, throwing the monster back and shattering the icy branches of the trees. A mysterious group of high-tech soldiers wearing protective goggles and thick winter cloaks steps into the clearing, their weapons at the ready. They stand in a neat defensive formation, their cold, masked faces showing absolutely zero fear as they confront the beast. The beast lets out a deafening, terrifying roar, the raw power of its voice shaking the entire forest. With a sudden burst of energy, the massive wolf-like monster charges forward, ready to shred the invaders to pieces. Later that afternoon, the scene shifts to the cozy parlor of the Portman estate, where the three surviving hunters are sitting on the sofa. Tyria sits across from them, her expression filled with deep concern and worry as she listens to their terrifying story. The hunters are still visibly shaking, admitting that they ran for their lives in a complete, flustered panic to escape the monster. She turns to Rhonda and instructs her to bring some warm food and proper medical supplies for their traumatized guests. Rhonda nods respectfully and exits the room, leaving Tyria alone with her thoughts. She walks over to her desk and opens a thick, leather-bound volume titled The Monster Encyclopedia. Aldio stands beside her as she flips through the pages, trying to find a match for the hunter's description of the beast. Based on the terrifying details of its speed, strength, and ice-cold aura, Tyria realizes they are dealing with a legendary blade wolf. Aldio is left stunned, pointing out that blade wolves were supposedly wiped out years ago after their pack leader was killed in battle. But Tyria's expression remains grimly serious. She knows that if even a single one of these magical beasts remains in Wiben, the entire fief is in grave danger. With a look of fierce determination in her golden eyes, she firmly declares that they cannot allow a single resident of this fief to face the same danger. She stands up and orders Aldio to immediately assemble a professional subjugation party to hunt down the beast. Aldio bows respectfully, agreeing to her command and promising to gather the most capable hunters in Wiben immediately. But before he leaves, Tyria raises her finger and sternly warns him not to breathe a single word of this matter to Elric. Aldio looks surprised, but Tyria explains that with Elric's severe leg injury, he would surely insist on joining the hunt himself, and she refuses to let him walk into danger again. She looks out the window, watching the heavy snow fall over the peaceful courtyard. She thinks back to the day Elric ran away, her heart aching with the memory of her long years of loneliness. She whispers to herself, promising that this time, it is her turn to shoulder the risk and protect the husband who finally came back to her. Aldio nods understandingly, his expression filled with deep respect for his mistress's strength and devotion. Outside, a large carriage is prepared, with several heavily armed hunters standing by as the horses stomp impatiently. The hunter group stands in a neat line, their weapons at the ready as they prepare to head into the dangerous forest. Tyria steps out of the mansion, looking incredibly dignified in her warm winter cloak as she prepares to lead them. She looks at the brave hunters and bids them safe travels, her voice steady and confident. She boards the carriage, and with a loud crack of the whip, they speed off into the snowy mountains. Meanwhile, Elric is currently in the bustling Wiben shopping district, walking with his cane as he heads toward a large stone building. He stops before the entrance, a wooden sign above the door carrying a red cross and the word hospital. He steps inside, the warm and sterile smell of medicine filling the cozy clinic. The clinic's elderly doctor, a kind man with round glasses, looks up from his desk and warmly greets him. He examines Elric's injured leg, gently poking the scarred knee and declaring with a smile that his recovery is going incredibly well. But the doctor firmly shakes his head, advising him to keep using it for a little longer, just to be cautious. He asks Elric if the prominent scar on his neck has been causing him any pain or issues recently. Elric smiles and shakes his head, stating that considering who treated it, he's not at all surprised it healed so cleanly. The doctor chuckles softly, reflecting on how difficult of a case it was, especially since Elric was so incredibly young at the time. He mentions how his father Hoven was practically begging him on his knees to save his son. Elric is caught completely off guard, his eyes wide in surprise as he asks if his father really did that. The doctor nods warmly, recalling that it was the very first time he ever saw the cold and unyielding Hoven's face turn completely pale with fear. Elric looks down, a quiet, emotional smile on his lips as he struggles to reconcile this new information with his memory of his cold father. The doctor stands up and pats his shoulder, advising him to avoid any overexertion for the next few days. Elric thanks him and slowly walks out of the clinic, his mind completely consumed by thoughts of his father. As he steps onto the snowy street, a sudden familiar voice calls out his name. Elric quickly turns around, his eyes widening in pure shock and delight. Standing there is his childhood best friend Luton, dressed in his official knight uniform, laughing heartily and saying, "It's been far too long." He runs forward and wraps Elric in a massive emotional hug, patting his back in sheer excitement. Luton grins broadly, proudly showing off his new steel sword and teasing Elric about whether he actually joined the Royal Knights, as they always dreamed of. Elric laughs warmly, his heart full as they share a light-hearted happy moment together after a whole decade apart. He suggests they head to a nearby tavern so they can sit down, have a drink, and catch up on everything they missed. Luton happily agrees, telling Elric that the first round is on him. But just as they are about to leave, a young boy from the Portman estate runs up to them in a complete flustered panic. Elric's expression instantly hardens as he takes the paper, his danger senses spiking. He quickly reads the letter, his eyes widening in pure horror as he learns that Wyvern is under attack. The messenger stammers in panic, explaining that a rescue request has arrived from the Portman house. He delivers the devastating final news. Lady Tyria has reportedly been attacked by a terrifying magical beast in the mountains. Deep in the snowy storm-swept mountains of Wyvern, the subjugation party is in the middle of a desperate, terrifying struggle. Shots ring out continuously, echoing across the frozen peaks. Two massive, glowing-eyed blade wolves sprint through the deep snow, their fast and menacing movements easily dodging the hunter's fire. A hunter fires his rifle at close range, the explosive muzzle flash illuminating the snowy trees. The bullet strikes the charging beast directly in the head, sending blood flying as the monster lets out a painful, desperate howl. The commander of the subjugation party yells out, ordering his men to keep their aim steady and fire together. He tells them they must hold the beasts off at all costs to protect Lady Tyria, while ordering her to flee immediately. Marie grabs Tyria's hand, frantically pointing toward a small snow-covered wooden cabin in the distance and urging her to take shelter inside. The two women run as fast as they can through the heavy snow, desperately heading toward the safety of the cabin. Outside, the brave hunters raise their glowing blue mana lanterns, preparing to lure the remaining beasts away. They charge into the forest, hoping the bright mana light from the lanterns will distract the wolves and keep them away from the cabin. A hunter yells in relief as the plan works, confirming that the beasts have taken the bait and are all moving in their direction. Inside the dim, quiet cabin, Tyria and Marie huddle together on the floor, shivering in fear as the storm rages outside. Tyria hugs Marie tightly, her voice filled with quiet guilt as she apologizes for dragging her into such a dangerous situation. But Marie stubbornly shakes her head, telling her lady not to say such things since she was the one who insisted on coming along. Marie assures her that the rescue party should be on its way, but Tyria looks down, still believing she did the right thing by hiding the truth from Elric to keep him safe. Marie looks up with tears welling in her eyes, terrified but trying to stay strong for her beloved mistress. Meanwhile, Elric and Luton are riding on horseback through the heavy snowstorm, desperately heading toward the coordinates of the subjugation party. Elric's expression is deadly serious, his mind filled with panic. He can't understand why Tyria would walk straight into such a dangerous situation entirely on her own. He grits his teeth, his grip on the horse's reins tightening as his heart pounds with fear for her safety. Luton shouts over the howling wind, telling Elric to keep his head clear and promising that they will get her out of there safely. A young messenger runs through the snowy forest, frantically searching for any sign of the main subjugation force. Behind him, a terrifying blade wolf stands in the shadows, its glowing red eyes locked onto the defenseless boy. The boy trembles in absolute fear, realizing he is completely cornered by the beast. Just as the wolf is about to strike, Luton and the other knights charge into the clearing on horseback, weapons drawn. The knights shout out, notifying the messenger that they have arrived to rescue them. Elric leaps off his horse, sprinting toward the wounded hunters who are retreating from the front lines. He grabs one of the soldiers by his shoulders, desperately demanding to know where Tyria is and if she is safe. The trembling hunter explains that Lady Tyria has taken shelter in a nearby cabin, but their comrades are currently cut off and fighting the beasts alone. Elric's eyes widen, and he asks the hunter to immediately lead him to their location so he can pull them out. But Luton quickly grabs Elric's shoulder, stopping him and stating that he will go and rescue the trapped hunters instead. Luton tells Elric that he needs to focus on getting to his wife, promising that he will bring the other hunters back safely. Elric hesitates, but Luton gives him a confident, reassuring smile, telling him he is no longer the cowardly boy he used to know. Elric nods, deeply grateful for his friend's strength as he accepts the plan. He orders the remaining soldiers to move out with him and show him the way to the cabin where Tyria is hiding. Elric runs ahead through the deep snow, his heart pounding in his chest. He tells himself that he has to reach her, no matter what it takes. He pushes forward through the howling wind and blinding snow, his mind entirely focused on saving his wife. His boots sink deep into the heavy snow, but he refuses to slow down for even a single second. He spots several glowing red eyes in the dark woods, realizing the area is already completely filled with magical beasts. He mutters a curse, praying that everyone is still in one piece as he continues his desperate search. Suddenly, he spots the small wooden cabin through the trees and runs toward it with renewed speed. He reaches the front doors of the cabin, his heart in his throat as he prepares for the worst. With a desperate, roaring voice, he screams her name. Inside, Tyria and Marie gasp in absolute disbelief as the doors are thrown open, revealing Elric standing in the doorway. Tyria's breath catches in her throat as she stares at her husband, unable to believe he actually came all this way for her. With quick, heavy steps, Elric runs into the room and pulls her into a tight, desperate embrace. Tyria blushes furiously, her heart melting as she clings to his broad chest, asking why he would come all the way to such a dangerous place. He hugs her even tighter, his hands trembling as he holds her close to his heart. He pulls back slightly, his face filled with worry and anger as he asks how she could do something so incredibly dangerous without talking to him first. He looks into her eyes, his voice trembling as he admits that he simply didn't want to put her in any danger. He asks her if she really has so little faith in him as her husband. Tyria is taken aback by his emotional words, her eyes soft as she realizes how deeply he cares for her. Elric holds her close, whispering that he is just incredibly grateful she is unharmed, but begs her to promise she will never put herself in danger alone again. Tyria smiles warmly, a soft blush on her cheeks as she hugs him back and promises him she won't. Marie watches them from the side, a happy and relieved smile on her face as she wipes her tears. They stand together in the warm cabin, the heavy emotional wall between them completely shattered. Suddenly the front doors open, and Marie gasps in excitement as the other hunters return from the forest. They enter the room, and the group praises the quick work of the knights in luring the beasts away. But Elric's expression quickly turns serious as he looks at the group and notices someone is missing. With a tense, focused voice, he asks where Luton is. The lead hunter looks down, admitting that Luton stayed behind to face the remaining pack of blade wolves alone to cover their retreat. Elric's eyes widen in horror, and he angrily punches the wall, calling Luton a complete fool. He immediately orders the soldiers to take Tyria and Marie down the mountain while he goes back into the forest for Luton. But Tyria suddenly grabs his sleeve, stopping him in his tracks. With tears in her eyes and her voice trembling, she admits that the thought of him being hurt completely terrifies her. She looks at him pleadingly, asking him to promise that he will return to her completely safe and sound. Elric looks at her warm, worried face, a look of quiet determination appearing on his face as he prepares to head back into the cold night. Tyria grabs tightly onto Elric's sleeve, her hands shaking as she looks up at him. She is terrified of losing him again and begs him not to get hurt. With tears swelling in her eyes, she desperately asks him to promise her that he'll return safely this time. Elric gently places his hand over hers, trying to comfort her as best as he can. He tells her he appreciates her concern, but he has to go. He gives her a warm, reassuring smile and promises to bring Luyten back and return home safely. As he gently lets go of her hand and begins to walk away, Tyria calls out with one final warning. She tells him that if he breaks this promise, she will absolutely never forgive him. Elric looks back with a soft smile, nodding as he walks out into the falling snow. He speeds through the snowy forest, leaving deep tracks in the fresh snow as he searches for his friend. Deep in the woods, Knight Luyten is locked in a brutal struggle, barely holding back a massive blade wolf with his sword. Using the last of his strength, Luyten slashes through two wolves, but the exhaustion is quickly catching up to him. With blood dripping down his face, he gasps heavily, realizing he has completely reached his limit. He looks up only to see dozens of glowing red eyes staring back at him through the blizzard. Talk about a worst-case scenario. Luyten lets out a dry, self-deprecating laugh, completely stunned by the sheer size of the pack surrounding him. He can barely keep his eyes open as the cold and blood loss begin to take their toll. With his vision fading, he realizes there is absolutely no escape from this freezing nightmare. But instead of giving up, he screams out with the last of his energy, resolving to die like a true knight of his hometown. He drops to his knees in the snow, mocking the wolves for hesitating when he doesn't even have the strength to swing his sword anymore. One of the wolves bares its massive fangs, snarling as it prepares to finish him off. The beast leaps forward through the air, aiming directly for Luyten's throat. Luyten closes his eyes, bracing himself for the fatal bite as the wolf's shadow looms over him. Suddenly, a massive steel blade pierces straight through the wolf's chest, stopping the beast mid-air. Luyten opens his eyes in absolute shock, unable to comprehend what just happened. It is Elric. He stands there holding a heavy rifle, teasing Luyten for looking so terrible despite being a royal knight. Elric casually throws the weapon aside, explaining that while it has great firepower, guns aren't really his style. He reassures a panicked Luyten that Tyria is completely safe. Elric smiles warmly, but then admits he has a rather difficult favor to ask of him. He looks down at Luyten's hand, asking if he can borrow his knight's sword for a moment. He turns to face the massive army of wolves blocking their path, looking completely calm. Luyten hands over his blade without a second thought, declaring that he would gladly lend Elric his life if he asked. But he warns Elric that a real sword is incredibly heavy and completely different from the wooden ones they used as kids. Elric takes the hilt in his hand, and suddenly a massive surge of blue mana energy begins to crackle around his body. He glances back with a smirk, asking Luyten if he was curious about what he was doing during his 10 years away. He steps forward alone to face the pack, stating that it is much easier to just show him. The wolves sense the massive power surge and snarl, preparing to attack this new threat. Elric remembers that blade wolves are highly sensitive to mana energy, which is exactly what he wants. They charge at him in a massive wave, but Elric doesn't even flinch. With a single lightning-fast swing, Elric unleashes a colossal shockwave of blue mana, vaporizing the front line of wolves. The impact shatters the frozen ground, kicking up a massive cloud of snow and ice. Elric charges straight into the heart of the pack, moving like a blue lightning bolt as he slices through the beasts. He spins and cuts down another wolf in midair, completely dominating the battlefield. Luyten watches from the snow in absolute awe, completely speechless as Elric tears the pack apart. He flashes back to the little kid who used to run around with a bucket on his head, realizing this monstrous warrior is someone else entirely. Elric continues his relentless assault, leaving a trail of defeated wolves in his wake. With one final massive sweep of his sword, he unleashes a wave of energy that clears the entire clearing. The blue light cuts straight through the valley, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. As the energy fades, Elric stands victorious, the battle over in a matter of seconds. He holds the sword casually, looking completely unfazed by the insane feat he just pulled off. He lets the remaining mana disperse from his hands, returning to his usual calm self. He walks back toward Luyten, the sword resting easily in his grip. Luyten is left sweating in pure shock, completely unable to process how his childhood friend became this powerful. Elric smiles warmly, asking if that finally satisfied his curiosity. Luyten can only look at him in disbelief, still trying to wrap his head around the situation. He admits that if anything, he is actually way more confused now than he was before. The storm finally begins to clear, revealing the quiet, snow-covered cabin where they took shelter. Back inside, Luyten sits wrapped in clean bandages, thanking Elric for saving his life once again. Elric smiles and tells him he didn't really do anything, but Luyten insists that he owes him everything. Luyten proudly states that since he owes him his life twice over, Elric only needs to give the word and he will follow any order. Elric takes him up on that offer, asking Luyten to take all the credit for hunting the wolves so he can keep his own identity a secret. Luyten's jaw drops in comedic shock. Elric explains that he has his reasons for wanting to stay out of the spotlight and asks if he can help him with this. Luyten hesitates, feeling incredibly guilty about stealing his friend's legendary achievement. Cut to the village square, where a massive crowd of townspeople has gathered to celebrate. The village elder loudly praises Luyten, calling him the true hero of Wibben for defeating so many beasts alone. Luyten looks incredibly awkward and sweat drops as he tries to play along with the lie. Elric stands in the back of the crowd, giving him a playful wave and a thumbs up to keep his spirits up. Luyten can only sweat in silence, wishing he could just crawl into a hole and hide. He musters up his courage and declares that he merely drew his sword for the peace of Wibben, making the elder even more proud. The elder raises his hands, leading the crowd in a massive cheer for the knight who saved their town. The crowd erupts into joyous cheers, chanting Leuten's name as confetti falls. Seeing that his friend is safe and his secret is secure, Elric decides it is time to head back home as well. He walks away from the cheering crowd, heading back toward the carriage waiting for him. The carriage departs, the sound of horses' hooves echoing through the snowy streets. They travel quickly through the beautiful snow-drenched countryside of Wyvern. The wheels spin smoothly as the carriage pulls up to the Portman estate. Elric steps out, a look of quiet exhaustion on his face after the long day. A familiar warm voice calls out to welcome him back to the manor. Tyria stands at the entrance with a gentle smile, admitting she was starting to worry since he was so late. Elric apologizes, explaining that he wanted to bid a proper farewell to Leuten before returning. Tyria notices he isn't using his cane anymore and asks how his leg is doing. Elric quickly stammers that the doctor warned him not to overexert himself. He gently holds her hands, smiling as he assures her that he is perfectly fine. His expression softens as he looks into her beautiful green eyes. He softly begs her to promise him that she will never put herself in danger alone like that again. Tyria blushes slightly and smiles, promising that she will keep his words in mind. Elric suggests they head inside before they both catch a cold standing out in the snow. He reaches out and opens the heavy front doors for her. He politely gestures for her to go in first, looking like a true, caring gentleman. Watching them from the hallway, Marie whispers that spring seems to be arriving early for the couple, while Rhonda giggles and notes, "It feels more like summer." Tyria walks past him with a soft thank you, her heart racing as she looks at her husband. Elric panics and catches her in his arms, screaming for her to wake up as the chapter comes to a dramatic end. Tyria lies completely unconscious in her bed, her condition rapidly deteriorating after her sudden collapse. The high-quality portrait on the wall is a painful reminder of her usual, vibrant self. The estate's personal physician looks grave as he delivers the grim news to a worried Elric. He admits that her illness is far more severe than anyone had anticipated. Elric's face turns pale as the doctor warns him that Tyria is currently facing a critical life-threatening crisis. The doctor sighs, noting that seeing Elric's terrified expression brings back memories of his late father, Hoven, who wore that exact same face of pure dread. Elric instantly grabs the doctor's shoulder, his gloved hand clenching the fabric tightly as panic completely takes over his mind. With a desperate, cracking voice, Elric begs him to do everything in his power to save her, declaring that Tyria is the most precious person in his life. The doctor bows respectfully, promising the young master that he will do everything humanly possible to treat her. A carriage speeds off through the heavy snowstorm, desperately carrying the medical supplies needed to save the lady. Elric stands outside the mansion in the biting cold, staring blankly up at the dark sky as his mind races with worry. His legs suddenly buckle beneath him, and he collapses onto the cold, snowy ground in absolute despair. The maids rush out of the mansion, screaming his name in panic. Rhonda and Marie kneel beside him, trying to comfort their master and urging him to stay strong and keep his composure. Night falls over the grand estate as a single warm light flickers from the dining room window, where Elric sits alone. He stares blankly down at the delicious breakfast plate in front of him, but the food only triggers painful memories. He flashes back to their mornings together, remembering how Tyria would gently look across the table and ask if the food was to his liking. He remembers her beautiful, radiant smile that always made his heart skip a beat. In reality, they barely spoke to each other during their brief time together, and the guilt of his past distance begins to weigh heavily on his soul. Elric clenches his fist, bitterly questioning why on earth he didn't try harder to talk to her and get to know her better when he had the chance. Back in the present, his internal monologue is cut short as he stares down at his cold, untouched plate. Rhonda and Marie watch him from the doorway, Rhonda noting with deep concern that the young master hasn't eaten a single bite. Rhonda steps forward to check on him, her voice filled with quiet worry as she calls out his name. Marie quietly steps forward and begins to clear the cold plate from the table. Marie's sweat drops in worry, whispering to herself that normally the young master completely devours his meals like a wild beast. Elric looks away guiltily, offering a quiet apology to Rhonda and admitting that he simply doesn't have any appetite. Rhonda's expression softens, and she gently suggests that he take a walk through the private garden Tyria visited and tended to almost every single day. Elric arrives at the hidden garden, completely stunned to find a breathtaking bed of blue roses blooming beautifully in the middle of the harsh winter. The vibrant blue petals contrast beautifully with the white snow, looking like something straight out of a fairy tale. He asks Rhonda if this is truly Tyria's garden. Rhonda nods, explaining that her lady tended to these flowers with absolute devotion even long before his return. She explains that anything is possible when someone's deep devotion is combined with magic, noting that her lady put her magecraft to wonderful use. Rhonda reminisces with a smile, recalling how Elric himself was incredibly interested in plants and herbs when he was a child. Elric quietly dismisses it as a faded memory. Elric stands amidst the falling blue petals, realizing his mind is no longer filled with the sweet scent of flowers. A dark flashback of his mercenary days shows him standing on a burning, blood-soaked battlefield surrounded by mountains of fallen enemies. The only scent he knows now is the stench of blood. Rhonda continues, mentioning that Tyria had many fond memories of plants, and had even dreamed of becoming a great medic when she was a little girl. Rhonda sits quietly, giving her master some space as the heavy realization begins to settle in his mind. Elric is left completely stunned, repeating her words in disbelief. A high-born noble lady wanting to become a medic makes no sense to him. Suddenly, a spark of recognition flashes in his eyes as a long-forgotten childhood memory comes rushing back. He remembers the young golden-haired girl who knelt in the woods 10 years ago, carefully wrapping a clean bandage around his bleeding leg. Elric clutches his head in absolute shock, whispering to Rhonda that he is fine, but that he just remembered a crucial truth he had foolishly forgotten. Rhonda notices the drop in temperature and gently suggests they head back inside the warmth of the mansion, to which Elric quietly agrees. As evening falls over the estate, the windows of the grand mansion glow warmly against the winter sky. Elric walks straight to Tyria's office, where he is surprised to find the family's loyal butler Aldio sitting behind her desk. Elric frowns, asking Aldio what on earth he is doing in his wife's private study. Aldio gestures to the towering mountain of financial documents, calmly explaining that there is a massive amount of paperwork that needs to be reviewed. Elric is surprised, asking if Aldio even knows how to process estate accounts. Aldio points out that he worked under his late father Hoven for half of his life. Elric's anger suddenly flares, and he demands to know why Aldio didn't help her more instead of letting her get overworked to the point of collapsing. Aldio looks at him calmly, stating with all due respect that he was simply following Lady Tyria's strict direct orders to stay out of it. Elric looks down guiltily, asking if there is at least something he can do to help. Aldio politely but firmly declines, stating he needs to focus on his work. Accepting his answer, Elric sighs and turns to leave, promising to have Rhonda bring him some hot tea to help him get through the night. A few minutes later, Marie pushes a luxurious tea cart down the hallway, her expression nervous as she approaches the young master's study. She knocks gently on the door, announcing that she's prepared some fresh tea. Elric quietly tells her to come in. Marie steps inside the quiet, dimly lit room, holding her breath so she doesn't disturb his thoughts. Elric sits silently on the sofa, looking incredibly exhausted and worn out from the emotional toll of the day. Marie carefully pours the hot tea, her hands trembling slightly as she watches her master's somber expression. The warm, golden liquid fills the white porcelain cup, steam rising gently into the quiet air. Marie smiles cheerily, explaining that she brewed the special rose tea that Tyria usually enjoys, hoping it will help him feel a bit better. Elric looks down at the pink tea, his heart aching as he thinks about his wife's favorite things. Marie clenches her hands, encouraging him to cheer up, and reassures him that the lady is strong and will definitely be all right. Elric manages a weak, gentle chuckle, apologizing to Marie for making the household staff worry about him so needlessly. Marie instantly panics, waving her hands and bowing frantically as she stammers that she only spoke up because he looked so incredibly sad. Comically flustered, Marie screams that she will be on her way and bolts from the room, slamming the door shut. Left alone in the quiet parlor, Elric sighs softly, whispering her name as he clutches his knees. Outside, a beautiful full moon hangs high in the starry sky, shining over the quiet mansion. The moonlight reflects off the snow, a silent prayer for Tyria's safe and speedy recovery echoing in the quiet night. The scene cuts to the local clinic, where a warm light glows from the second-story window against the dark night. Inside, Tyria lies weakly in bed with a damp cloth on her forehead, her cheeks flushed with a high fever as the physician watches over her. In her feverish state, Tyria struggles to stay conscious, whispering to herself that she cannot afford to stay weak like this. Tears stream down her pale cheeks as she cries in her sleep, terrified that her condition will cause Elric to worry himself to death. The doctor looks down at her notebook, sweat pouring down her face as she asks the weakly breathing lady if she can hear her. Tyria's eyes remain closed as she slips deeper into her feverish dreams, her mind still entirely consumed by thoughts of her husband.